Ottawa woman named one of America's most powerful women by Newsweek magazine as San Francisco's first female Indian-American district attorney, Kamala Harris. She's out with a new book called Smart on Crime, a career prosecutor's plan to make us safer.
I'm a career prosecutor. I really believe that California has the ability, as that old adage says, so goes California, goes the rest of the country, to do what I think is really necessary in terms of reform of our criminal justice system so that we're reducing crime in our communities and increasing public resources.
Every time we get the expansion of citizenship and rights to African Americans, there is an immediate mobilization of new criminal laws and a small incarceration, at least initially, right? We see this happening after slavery, the black codes that basically make it a crime to not be employed by a white person, the simultaneous rise of a new system of penal labor. So this was the first kind of mini mass incarceration. So the federal government, by the time Ronald Reagan took office, something kind of strange begins to happen during this period with crime control strategies, and that's that police are no longer being charged with responding to crime that actually happens. But police are now being charged to respond to crime preemptively or proactively, responding to crime where it is thought to occur. So these flawed logics and investments have really structured many of our domestic social policies in the decade after the civil rights movement, and in doing so have undone many of the gains of the civil rights movement. Instead of continuing the war on poverty's investments in schools and in jobs and in better housing for people, the investments into policing and surveillance and incarceration end up surpassing those goals.
Both of my parents are repeat ex-offenders, and almost half of my brothers have spent time in incarceration. The system is broken at every single angle. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to oppress and criminalize Black and brown folks.
My family grew up in Harlem. My family is from Harlem. So I've had my brothers be swallowed by the mass criminal industrial complex. People were forced to do things that were not of their best interest, specifically sell drugs, right? So I've had brothers have to do things that, and I've had the conversations with them that they wish they didn't, have to do. But at that time, they were literally forced. They couldn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. They were hungry at nights, going to sleep, eating dreams, literally eating dreams. And then have to go to school the next day and try to learn something. It's almost an impossible task, right? So then they become, all right, what's around me? What can I do to make money? Because I realized something. Being poor in America is one of the hardest things to do in this country. And if you feel like you're poor, you feel like you have nothing, you will do anything to get that. Poverty produces crime. That's just a simple fact.
What we're discussing now is an issue where some of our friends are saying we're not getting tough enough on the criminals. We have the highest percentage of people in America in jail per capita of any industrialized nation on earth. What do we have to do? Put half the country behind bars? Mr. Speaker, instead of talking about punishment and vengeance, let us have the courage to talk about the real issue. How do we get to the root causes of crime? How do we stop crime? I've got a problem with a president and a Congress which allows 5 million children to go hungry, 2 million people to sleep out on the streets, cities to become breeding grounds for drugs and violence. If you want to get tough on crime, let's deal with the causes of crime. Let's demand that every man, woman, and child in this country have a decent opportunity and a decent standard of living. Let's not keep putting poor people into jail and disproportionately punishing blacks.
My first day of work was January 17, 2023.
Robert Turner Jr. is the newest district attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, and he's inherited counties with unflattering titles, highest poverty rates in the state, highest violent crime rates per capita, higher than several other larger surrounding counties, including Montgomery. Do you think the poverty rate plays a part in crime?
I think that the poverty rate does play a large role in the amount of crime that we're seeing. If there's not a lot of revenue coming in from existing businesses, then those cities and those counties don't have enough money to outfit police departments that can handle the surges that we're seeing in crime. The state and the nation needs to take a look at what happens, because until we eliminate poverty, until we eliminate lack, crime will remain a question.
When it comes to what is actually occupying a lot more space in our criminal justice system and therefore costing us a lot more, it's nonviolent crime. And I think we need to address that and deal with it in a way that ends the cycles. If we're going to really get tough on crime, we also have to address the underlying causes of crime and get tough on those.
Youngstown was once a great American city. 50 years ago, there were 25 miles of steel mills up and down the Mahoning River. Men left high school, found work in the factories, and moved their families into the middle class. It took 150 years to make Youngstown rich, but less than a generation for it to fall. Today, Youngstown is the poorest city in America. It's lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs and more than half of its total population. The reality is that cities like Youngstown failed to make the transition from the modern to the postmodern world. Over the past 30 years, there's been a dramatic rise in depression, addiction, violence, and suicide. We've demolished the old social order, but found nothing to replace it.
The criminal justice system disenfranchises men and women, preventing them from growing, from truly being free. I am among the very few fortunate enough to be living a second chance. 3 decades ago, I was involved in a crime that took the life of another human being. I spent over 24 years in prison for my role in that reprehensible crime. Upon release, I found an employer willing to look beyond my criminal record. Meaningful re-entry increases productivity, reduces poverty, and saves money. Most importantly, it makes us safer by eliminating the circumstances that perpetuate cycles of crime and punishment. People already get punished harshly by the system, but they shouldn't receive a second sentence that makes discriminating against them legal for the rest of their lives. By restoring full rights of citizenship to people after they've been through the system, we can start to end this cycle of perpetual punishment.
One person's poverty is another person's paycheck. And that's the American way. That's as American as apple pie. We shouldn't have to acknowledge that trauma because like they're paid to be there. We live in these places. Like police officers have historically not been held accountable because they protect and serve the rich, and then they just harass and take up space in poor communities.
Right.
How do we start to build towards changing that culture, and what does that conversation look like on a national scale?
What creates safe communities is recognizing that undiagnosed and untreated trauma among children who are growing up in high violence communities or in poverty, because by the way, poverty is trauma inducing.
Yeah, it is. Poverty is violence, right?
I think part of the issue is that in some people's mind, the only way you achieve safe communities is to have a law enforcement presence.
For white communities.
It's crazy.
Right, but the point being that we have to reorder how people understand safe happens. Mm-hmm. Safe happens by having, resources in a community. Mm-hmm. Safe happens by addressing undiagnosed and untreated trauma. Safe happens by having, literally economic opportunities. Among what we should think about as civil rights is the right to everybody to live in a safe community. Mm-hmm. And so then how do we achieve that? And if we think about it that way, then we understand, well, that's not going to be about reacting to crime after it happens. That's going to be about preventing it before it does. And then you don't have to be really creative to figure out what prevention looks like. It looks like putting those kinds of resources into a community.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Culture. I am one of your hosts tonight, Quisha King. We are going to have a fantastic show for you this evening. I am having some technical difficulties, so please bear with me. I don't, Chad, if you can hear me, since I'm on my phone tonight, I cannot see the controls, so you probably will have to do the maneuverings this evening. But I will say this topic is very interesting because it's funny how the left wants to and some people on the right want to blame everything on, or blame crime in particular on being poor. Now, I remember my great-grandparents. I remember my grandparents. We didn't come from a ton of money and all of those types of things, but what we did have was character and integrity. And somehow that kept our family from going into crime, because it's actually character and integrity that predicts these things that you will do in the future as far as crime, not if you grow up poor. There are so many poor people that do not commit crime. They don't ever talk about those disparate numbers, those numbers that are the amount of people that are poor but are not committing crimes. I don't want to talk about that. But to further discuss this, I have a ton of things to say about this. I have a lot of notes that I've written just from the montage. Let's go ahead and bring up Blanche Robinson. Hi, Blanche.
What's up, Quisha? How you doing?
I'm good. I'm trying to get these technical difficulties. Here we are, another week. It just won't let me be great.
I know, man. It's tough.
Well, what's up? What do you think of the montage? What do you think about this idea that Kamala says that ending poverty, if that's even something that is possible, will end crime?
I think they have this thing where they believe, or I don't say they, but I know the Muslims believe it, and some other folks believe it, but the story of Yaqub. And basically, I guess he created white people. I've heard a story where he created white people to have somewhere to put all of the bad things that were in black people. So in other words, he took all the bad things out of black people and put it into these white people. And then in essence, black people were perfect, but now their antagonist is white people. And if you think about it, as crazy as that story sounds, that's what's going on today. Because the premise is not just that if you end poverty, it will fix crime. It's the fact that you believe that getting rid of poverty is going to expose how perfect black people are. I think the whole premise behind this is that black people are perfect. The only thing that corrupts them is any kind of interaction with white people or some white institution. When black comes in contact with white, then they become corrupted. And so the whole premise behind all of this is that black people are perfect, because no one ever says, well, most people do crime because they want to. They want a shortcut. Nobody ever says that the reason why you may be impoverished is because you took a lot of shortcuts. You cut corners, you didn't do things the right way. And so when we're talking about poverty, no one ever talks about how the person gets into poverty. They just talk about them from a standpoint of being in poverty. And so I just go back to the magical thinking of, if white people didn't touch black people in any kind of way, black folks would be perfect. And we all know that's not the case, because we go to most of these major inner cities, there isn't a white person around and black folks is acting a fool. So clearly that couldn't be the case. And if it was the case, you would see, pyramids in the hood. If black folks wasn't, no white folks around, black folks would be building ancient Kemet all in the hood, but you see the opposite. You see a great tearing down. But yeah, so I just think that the problem is the foundation of all of this, and the foundation is that white people cause all these problems. If you're talking about capitalism or poverty or whatever, the root of what they're saying is white people caused it. So the root, when they say fix poverty, what they're saying is fix white people. They're not talking about any economic solution, but they're talking about fixing white people. We need to take power from white people so that they can't, quote unquote, oppress. And honestly, Quisha, these people would be very satisfied for everybody to be poor. Like if they saw white people impoverished, they would be okay with everybody else being impoverished. Like that's how their mind is wired, to where they want to see white people suffering. And so white people do suffer as much as the country does, because people live in check to check. Most of the country does live check to check. Most countries didn't have a savings or anything. So again, the whole foundation of this stuff is wrong. It's flawed. And that's just where I stand on that.
So I want to actually pose this to both, just so you guys know in the chat, Chuck is going to be a few minutes late. A few minutes. He's going to be late tonight. But my question would be, I will pose this to you and Chad. Chad, if you want to come on up as I ask this, because I think it's a pretty interesting question. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You guys say hello to our fearless leader. But when Blanche was talking, this made me think about something. Okay, so we all know about the Holocaust and everything like that, right? And we know how the rhetoric was before the Germans did what they did. We can see a lot of what people are saying about white people, what Black people in particular are saying about white people today and other white folks. Do you think, I mean, we know the heart is desperately wicked. What happens when the government starts to believe that, like really internally believes that it's white people, they're the crazy ones? What happens if they go down a path that Germany went down? Do you even think that is possible, Chad? And Blanche, I want to know what you think about that.
Go ahead, Blanche.
Okay, yeah. So it's actually going to happen. So what you're seeing now is globally, you're seeing white people being attacked, and justification is that white people are racist. Mm-hmm. So think about it. So because so for a white person to go against anything, they're automatically racist. So this is the foundation of this anti-white agenda, is that a white person is not able to point out wrong. If a white person points out wrong, then they're racist. So that means that they must remain silent. So when you say the government getting involved, and you say, well, if you think about it, look at what everybody's saying on TV. Kamala Harris has said that white men are the biggest threat. Joy Reid has said it. Don Lemon has said it. Joe Biden has even said it. Many people have said that white Christian men are the greatest threat to the country. So my prediction is what they're setting up now is the foundation for an actual Holocaust in modern times, but just against white. If you think about it on a global scale, white people have small numbers. The world is mostly people of color. So they're already the minority. And so if you think about it, the immigration is into their countries. So not only is the media saying that white is bad, but now you have an influx of immigrants with a culture class. Then on top of that, you have white people culturally wanting order and structure. So that automatically makes them be the voices to say, no, this is not right, this is not right. You think about it, with all the stuff going on, you go into in front of any protest that's legitimate protest, white people. If we're talking about abortion, if we're talking about anything that's legitimate for as a protest, you'll see white people. All the other protests that are fake, you see people of color. And so this anti-white agenda, like I said before, is really an anti-God agenda, because it's going to be hard to push a global agenda with white people around, because not all white, not the libtards. I'm talking about the Christian conservative white people. They're going to fight back. So you have to demonize them. And so if you think about it, Jussie Smollett lied on 2 random white people. No one ever said out of any commentary how that was wrong to do that to a group of people, because you're basically saying that the Trump supporters and white people are racist. So think about the girl said she was kidnapped. Think about all the stuff that happens to white people, and no one ever considers the white person. They talk about what happened. They don't actually say, you know what, that's wrong. So when you mention the Holocaust, that's what we're preparing for, because most folks won't argue. If you say a blanket statement, white people are racist, nobody argues that. Even though you got white liberals, you got white conservatives, you got white far left, you got white far right, you got white libertarians, even though you have white people being a multi-layered group of people, the statement, white people are racist. Now imagine when that's etched in stone. Imagine even when it comes to the trans agenda. they say it's the white men that don't want to be heteronormative. Even when it comes to the family structure, man, woman, child in the household, that's even white. The Washington Post wrote an article talking about freedom. The notion of freedom was linked to white supremacy. So you already see them setting up, and then think about Kamala Harris. Now you have a person that's running for president, and she has a white man that's her VP up under her. Just think about the optics of this. So you have black woman in charge, white man up under her. And so now anybody going against her, you're either going to be a racist or a person that is siding with racists. So what you mentioned, I see it happening just because there's too much. Okay, prime example. I'm gonna let you have a chat. But even in movies, right? I challenge anybody. Just go to Amazon Prime or go to Netflix and just watch a movie or watch some movies and tell me how many positive white characters you see in a movie. How many characters that are white that aren't mean, racist, LGBT. Just show me in a movie where it's a regular white person with good morals and value. You're not gonna find them. So the seeds are already being planted in people's heads that white people are bad. And so the underlining theme of what people were saying in that montage was that they're saying that poverty, but who caused the poverty? Because once you get to who caused poverty, they're going to point to white people. But really what they're saying is that this is God. Because it's going against order. So really their rebellion is against God. And so that's why it's going to happen. Because you're going to think about all these radical people, they can't attack God. But they can't attack the next best thing which is white people. White people are the ones that are held to the standard of perfection, nobody else. If a white person cut somebody off in traffic, they did it because they were racist.
Right.
If a white person is late to work, because they have privilege. Like if a white person does anything bad, it's a negative. They can't be human. So by not making them human, you make them a deity. Exactly. But so if they could be God, they can also be who? The devil. So what you're saying, I really see it happening because I've been looking at this stuff a lot, and I just see everybody's in on it. Everybody's in on the white people being bad, even white people.
Yeah, I was watching Joy Reid, and she's like, and she's not the only one that does it, but it's like I feel like they think that they are God, and their thoughts and they think that they can read the hearts and minds and intents of another human beings, like what they truly believe, simply because they're black and the other person is white, or the person is brown and the white person, like you said, is always the bad person. And it's like melanin just makes you like magical. It makes you be able to like know the hearts and intents of everybody. All I need to know, I can take a very superficial thing like race, and it will tell me your deepest, darkest. We're having a storm over here, so my lights are blinking. But my melanin can tell me and everybody else, the hearts and intents of another human being if they have less melanin than me. It's fascinating, how they can do this. What do you say about it, Chad?
Quisha, are you a masochist?
Am I a masochist? Why do you say that? I don't think so.
Why are you sitting down watching Joy Reid? Like, why would you do that to yourself?
Because I'm truly. I don't watch. I watch. I watch enough that I can take, because I'm really fascinated. I feel like I'm always trying to figure out: is she really this stupid? Is she really this evil, or is she just really a cult member? I feel like I'm always trying to figure out like, what is this crazy leftist person like? Where is their heart really? Are you really just brainwashed and believe in this stuff? Do you really know what's up, and you're just so evil that you'll just say it because you just truly believe in your revolution? Or I don't know.
No, I hear you. I mean,
it's interesting. Like,
yeah, I
don't know. I don't understand how these so-called smart people who go to these schools, and it's like you literally live in another universe. We're looking at we're both looking at an orange, but you think it's an apple, and you really think it's an apple, and it's bizarre. It's crazy. So I don't know. It's fascinating. That's why
so you liken it. So you liken it in, you liken it to going into like a science lab and studying a very strange thing.
Yes, that's how I look at it.
I can tell you that if not for social media like Reels on IG or Shorts on YouTube, I would never see Joy Reid or The View or any of that nonsense because I have zero interest in watching it. But yeah, I mean, the fact is, when it comes to these people, they are utilitarian. I think that's the best word to describe them, because to Blanche's point, on the one hand, you've heard them time and again accuse those on the right who use the word freedom of being white supremacists, and they say that, oh, the word freedom is a dog whistle to white supremacy. But then, on the other hand, the word freedom is one of the buzzwords for the Kamala Harris campaign. And of course, the reason they're doing that is because they've spent so long accusing Donald Trump of being a dictator or a wannabe dictator. And so conversely, they want to say that we are the party of freedom. Kamala Harris is the candidate for freedom, whereas Trump wants to be a dictator. So they're willing to pick up and drop words and verbiage on an as needed basis, because that's what they are. They're utilitarians. When it comes to this whole concept of whiteness, you'll notice that the word anti-white and anti-black means two different things when it comes to these people. To accuse someone of being anti-black is to basically accuse them of being racist, to accuse them of being against the survival and the existence and well-being of Black people. And they use this terminology often. You saw a heightened usage of it during the 2020 riots and protesting, and you saw a lot of schools adopting curriculum that is meant to bolster equity. So they kept using the terminology of anti-Black, and we don't want people to be anti-Black, and this is what it means to be anti-Black. And anti-white, by comparison, is a good thing. So they say anti-Black is bad, anti-white is good, because what they say is to be anti-white isn't necessarily to be anti a person per se, but rather anti a system, to be against a system of whiteness, a system that prioritizes white ideas, white thought, white culture, white standards. So this is what they say, and I'm just kind of giving people the kind of a rundown of how these people think. So to be anti-Black is bad, to be anti-white is good, because they're trying to topple a system that oppresses so-called marginalized people and so-called people of color. All of it is nonsense. All of it is hogwash. The fact is, decency is universal. You can be Black and be decent. You can be white and be decent. You can be Hispanic and be decent. You can be Asian and be decent. We know what decency is, and we know what dysfunction is. And it just so happens that Black culture is a proponent of dysfunction and not decency. Black culture promotes dysfunction and not decency. And so it's for that reason that the larger society has a recoil effect away from Black culture. They might be entertained by it. They might think it's, funny and humorous and can jump and can, run and can do all the things. But apart from that, all of the ratchet stuff that comes along with Black culture, people don't want to be associated with it. And that's, that's for good reason. That's for a very good reason. And so when you look at, let's take it down to a microcosmic level. Let's look at schooling, for example. If you look at predominantly Black schools in the, whether it be in the inner city or wherever the case may be, this is the rule. Actually, this is true most of the time, unless you are going to a predominantly Black, prestigious school that has a very high tuition and so on. But most of you know what I'm talking about when I say predominantly Black inner city schools. When you go to these schools, the culture is such, the vibe is such, the spirit is such that it's no wonder that hardly anybody comes out of these schools successful, because these schools, they basically are the epitome of what Black culture is. Making fun of you if you like to read, making fun of you if you use proper vocabulary, making fun of you if you like to study, prioritizing such things as, you know, who has on the best looking clothes or the latest name brands, or who is the best at sports. So basically prioritizing that which doesn't take you far in life, and besmirching and making fun of and dismissing that which will take you far in life. And so when you look at the cultural dynamic that exists, that is a thing that breeds poverty. That is a thing that breeds crime. That is a thing that breeds decadence, such and so forth. And so it's not something the white man is doing to you. Rather, it's the culture that you choose to perpetuate. And I could go on and on and on this subject, but yes, this whole idea and this whole concept of being anti-white, I believe, is part and parcel of what we see when it comes to this subject matter that we're talking about. Because, you know, to take it back to what Blanche was saying, one of the things that you'll see moving closer to the election, and not just moving closer to the election, but one of the things that you'll continue to see in academia and rhetoric and language, whether it be from a rapper and his songs, whether it be from the subliminal messaging in movies and television, whether it be from the rhetoric coming from your professors at your higher education and from your teachers at your secondary primary education, everywhere you look, you'll begin to see more and more of this language that says that poverty is the fault of the system that the white man has created, with all of its capitalism, with all of its religion, specifically Christianity, with all of its standards. The fact is, people of color, marginalized people, indigenous people, you know, on and on and on I can go, cannot live up to these standards. And so because these standards are the law of the land, nobody can survive it. And thus we need to topple it. And thus we need to get rid of it. And so when Kamala Harris says that by reducing poverty, we're reducing crime, understand that what she's saying is we must get rid of the system of meritocracy. We must get rid of the free market. We must usher in socialism. We must usher in Marxism. We must lower standards of decency, because in doing so, you'll lower crime. And in doing so, you'll lower poverty. And you have to understand, again, the substance of what it is she's saying, or the content within her messaging, if all that makes sense.
So, and can you guys hear me okay? I put my headphones in. Okay. I think if we are not careful, and if this thing continues to go the way that it is going, do you think that that America could get to a place where this thing is so ingrained and racism is actually like in the system, where they're saying, okay, white people are bad and evil, that they take up arms and stuff against white men in particular?
Yeah, they're already doing it.
Yes, it's gonna happen. They did something last year where they had like 300 some jobs, and they were bragging about how like only 0.0 something% of white people were hired. So think about them doing a full out attack on white people. Basically, when I say white, when I'm talking about white, I'm not talking about white liberals or libtards. I'm talking about white conservative Christians. So they're already going to attack them financially. You think about it, most of these institutions are liberal. The job market is pretty much liberal unless you either work for yourself or you're working in fields that are very, laborious, labor intensive. But so they're going to hit them with, because you got to think about corporate America, right? Corporate America is a cesspool for wokeness. So automatically a white man is going to be on the outs in corporate America. So that's the whole sector gone. Think about education. If the white guy isn't liberal or LGBTQ, he won't be able to teach in the school or be in administration. So education's out of the window. So if you look at and think about sports are pretty much mostly Black people in America. So again, I'm talking about basketball and football. Now, baseball has been taken over again by Latin America. But yeah, they're going to do it and justify it again, Quisha, because think about the narrative. The narrative is that white police kill Black people. white police hunt black people down. So anything that's negative automatically goes into the file of white. So that means police officers, the judges, the courtrooms, anything that involves accountability and rules and order gets linked to white people. So taking up arms, we hear the rhetoric in South Africa, and even here, you hear people saying that the police should be, bad things should happen to the police and all this, knowing good and well that if the police lead the black community, it'd be an all-out bloodbath. People know this. So look what people are willing to sacrifice to make this point about white people. They're willing for people to die just to say that white people shouldn't be here. And then even at my alma mater, Arizona State, there was some white kids sitting there doing their homework, and the black girl says, "This is a black space. Y'all got to go." So, Quisha, you muted, Quisha, but
I remember that, but I think didn't those guys sue them, and they won, I believe.
I mean, they probably, they probably did sue it, but my point is that a lot of stuff happens to white people. They don't even make the news. Yeah. If a white person gets killed by the police, nobody even cares.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So just think about where it is now and where it'll be in 20 years. Think about a group of people saying that everything that's wrong with us is white people's fault. Then you got the LGBTQ group saying everything that's wrong with us, it ain't heterosexuals no more. They point to white people.
Uh-huh.
So then you got the immigrants coming and say, you know what, the problem we got is we're white people.
Mm-hmm.
So then you got
climate change, everything, that they want. I mean, they just make up stuff, and we're gonna.
So Quisha, so Quisha, imagine the worst thing ever is climate change, because that deals with the actual planet being destroyed through whatever carbon. But imagine white people being blamed for climate change. Think about just everyday life of a white person. If somebody sees them and says they're the cause of us being on lockdown, the sun not being out, just imagine. So when you mention taking up arms, yes, it's going to happen sooner than we think.
I mean, when you were talking about it, it just sounds like what the same type of language that was happening before the Holocaust, actually happened, before they actually started rounding people up, but this is the kind of talk. And when people want to say, like that could never happen, it's like human beings do stuff like this, like we do. The heart is desperately wicked. And so when you see all that kind of stuff, like, and it's like, if their goal, like what Kamala has, she's like, oh, we have to end poverty. Like they're trying to end poverty, which is impossible, because the Bible says the poor will always be among you. We know we can't end poverty. It's a crazy, that's a crazy goal. But what if this is their goal and they are so intent on it, even if it is BS, what will they do to try to prove that their goal is legit? You know what I mean? Like, how far will they go to try and prove, like, yeah, white people are the cause of all this poverty and, crime, and, so yeah, let's just get rid of the problem.
And the data,
I think, and I hear what you say when you compare it to the Holocaust, but I think an even better comparison would be not the Holocaust or the Nazis in Germany, which, by the way, the Nazis is an acronym for the National German Socialist Party, lest we forget. But when you look at Mao's Cultural Revolution there in China, or when you look at what Stalin and Leon Trotsky and others were up to in the Soviet Union, I think their propaganda ran much stronger than what we saw in Germany with the Holocaust. It just so happens that because America with its commander-in-chief FDR, because we teamed up with the Soviet Union to defeat Germany. Naturally, all of our attention is focused on and paid to Germany and how they were the bad guys and how they were the big boogeyman or what have you. When the reality is the war was much more complex than I think many of us who are educated in American schools make it out to be. The fact is, when you look at the propaganda that came out of the communist world, that, to Quisha's point, pointed the finger at the enemy that they wished to build an army against. So whether it was a landlord in China, whether it was the Jew in Germany, to Quisha's point, or whether it was the landowner and the private property owner there in the Soviet Union, Quisha makes a really good point. The whole purpose is to build an army against those who they wish to neutralize, those who they wish to topple, those who they wish to overthrow. Whether it's in Cuba with what was his name, who was in charge before Fidel Castro.
Oh gosh.
But anyway, they overthrew. I forget the name is on the tip of my tongue. But again, the whole purpose is to build an army against those people. So Quisha, I think you make a very good point, because you see the same thing happening. These things happen in a very cyclical way. This kind of history repeats itself, and so the fact that on American university campuses they are targeting, whether it be this system of whiteness or whatever the case may be, that's something that people shouldn't just kind of dismiss or throw away. That's something that people should begin to take seriously, because the fact is a lot of youth are going to these colleges and universities. They're being indoctrinated to take a kind of critical view of everything, right? Critical theory. They're adopting this critical theory, namely, which is born straight out of cultural Marxism, where everything is looked at in terms of how does this oppress marginalized people? How does whiteness suppress or oppress marginalized peoples? How does whiteness hurt the climate? How does, you know what I mean? On and on and on I can go. How does whiteness hurt the inner city black? How does whiteness hurt the immigrant? How does, on and on and on I can go. And so people are being conditioned to believe that they are moral and that they are in fact righteous, to believe that they are coming out against what they perceive to be whiteness. And I was going to go somewhere with that, but I won't, because I know this video will get flagged if I do. But again, Quisha, brilliant point in pointing out how, you know, this is history repeating itself. So whether we're talking about Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union or the Cultural Revolution in China or what have you, we see this all over the place. I guess the only reason I'm saying what I'm saying right now is because I think it's easy for a lot of people to go directly to Nazi Germany, and in so doing, not give all these other communist regimes a pass. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing, but that's what tends to happen, when the reality is, if you look at these other regimes, in my opinion, they were even more severe than what we saw in Nazi Germany.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's all, it's all disgusting, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. I don't know. It never even really dawned on me until Blanche was talking just now that this is literally the same type of thing. Germany, China, all over.
Can I say one thing?
Oh yeah.
I just want to say one thing about when Chad was talking. So normally in societies, they give you a chance to, bend the knee, right? You want to get down with this or not? Yeah, you going to play ball or no? We're not going to play ball. Okay, off with your head. The unique thing about this anti-whiteness is that if you see it in society now, there's such an extreme push to not be a normal white person. So just think about a future time where the normal white person will stick out like a sore thumb, because they'll not only be white, but they won't be pierced up, tatted up, crazy looking hair. So they'll be easy to spot, identify. And so there's going to be a time where they won't have any redemption. Like they won't be given an opportunity to say, I'm not like this, or I don't know. They won't, because they'll already have been what you call like marked, to where they'll be the plain. They even talk about it now, the plain Jane, average, cookie cutter white person. That's going to be the quote unquote greatest threat. Imagine like somebody like Andy Griffith. They're pointing him like he's the cause of all of this. So, so I think the piece that's going to be very drastic in this is no redemption. Because you're inherently racist, you're born inherently racist, you're born inherently evil, there's no type of therapy for you. There's no type, like we can't fix you. So the only way to fix you is to either enslave you or to literally just fix you, for good. And so I think it'd be a little more, it's going to be to me, the most extreme version now, because it's global. It's the whole planet being fed this stuff and having this view towards a group of people. What Chad mentioned is great, because he's showing how it was this country, this country, this country. Now you see a global nations having the same feel about quote unquote white people. And again, with climate change, imagine something that's going to globally affect everybody. And they're saying these group of people are the cause. They're going to be getting hunted down. Just think about the mass hysteria for people losing all of their freedom because they gave them up, and then blaming these people who they think are freer than them. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's going to be horrific. I do.
Yeah. It's like they set these unattainable goals. So
perfection.
Yeah, they can always have something to march and complain about, but you need someone to blame. You need someone to blame for all of this, so you can continue to so you can agitate everything. So who are they gonna blame? And this is really crazy. I know we talk about this a lot, but I don't know why tonight it just seems like it's just getting really, really bad. People are way, way, way too comfortable with just demonizing. Okay, let me take this out.
I wish he stopped going to the flea market getting these plants.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
What?
Nothing.
Anyway.
Go ahead, Quisha.
I was just saying, I don't know. I forgot what I was saying. Oh, can you play the clip about the depression and all that? Like there's a rise in depression.
Rise in depression. Oh.
Yeah.
Wait, which one was that? Enlighten me.
Oh, the girl, the young lady the with the long curly hair.
Yeah, there's a rise in depression and.
No, they said a rise in oppression.
No, rise in depression and loneliness and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
From what?
Youngstown was once a great American city. 50 years ago, there were 25 miles of steel mills up and down the Mahoning River. Men left high school, found work in the factories, and moved their families into the middle class. It took 150 years to make Youngstown rich, but less than a generation for it to fall. Today, Youngstown is the poorest city in America. It's lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs and more than half of its total population. The reality is that cities like Youngstown failed to make the transition from the modern to the postmodern world. Over the past 30 years, there's been a dramatic rise in depression, addiction, violence, and suicide. We've demolished the old social order, but found nothing to replace it.
When I was listening to that, it was like there's been a rise in depression because a lot of the things that they promise are these unprincipled solutions that will never fix anything, and their prescription for the depression and the poverty and all this other kind of stuff is more stuff that makes you depressed, more stuff that gets you disconnected, more stuff that doesn't push you and get you to do things and create things and use your God-given talent. It's more that they want you to depend more on the government, but when you give away your independence, when you give away the things that make you better, it makes you more depressed. And so it's crazy. Like, they're talking about all these things that are supposed to help you, but these things will act, if you listen to them and their solutions, they will actually harm you. And so,
I mean, what they're saying, Quisha, is like it's kind of a complex deal, because like everything that you're saying is 100% spot on. And you'll notice kind of toward the end of the clip, he's saying that that Youngstown, Ohio failed because they refused to transition to the postmodern world.
Yeah.
And so he's using this language, and it's almost as if he's kind of laying the groundwork for, if y'all don't change infrastructurally for climate change, then this will happen to you too. This will happen to America as well if we don't adopt legislation that gets us ready for the latter half of the 21st century. Everything will be desolate and defunct in the same way that Youngstown, Ohio did, because they refused to break away from this kind of World War II era steel industrialization. But the fact is, the reason why I think it's complex is because this is in part a local issue, but it's also a federal issue, insofar that you have a lot of these corporations and still in factories who are vesting a lot of power into the federal government, and is allowing the federal government to do its bidding, such to where when you have a lot of money involved, because the government has an interest in looking out for itself, it's only a matter of time before they begin to ship those jobs overseas, because they're making you have the government who's involved in what should be a free market thing, a private sector thing in terms of trading and this sort of thing. I don't think that the government should have as much of a hand in it as possible, or as it does. But two, when it comes to city planning, and that's what I mean when I say the local piece. When it comes to city planning, to make your town, to put all your proverbial eggs in one basket in terms of like, oh, we're the steel capital of the world, or we are the concrete capital of the world. We make concrete, we make this. Well, what happens when people stop buying steel? What happens when people stop buying whatever product that you have put your eggs in that singular basket? Well, whenever people stop buying that item and those jobs go away, what happened in Youngstown, Ohio will happen. We saw this too with the Detroit and other automobile manufacturers, because you had a lot of things happening. You had government involvement, you had the bureaucracies, you had these towns, these mayors and cities councils who were inviting all these factories, come here, set up factories, set up your shop, and they give all this land to these factories and stuff like that. And then it brings jobs, and those jobs go away because that market crashes. And then all of a sudden you're left with this big town that's a no man's land. And so city planning has a lot to do with it as well. So there's a lot of moving parts is what I'm trying to say. And it's the reason why, for me, it's like, I quite enjoy being not having to depend on some, corporation or what have you that is in bed with the government, who's willing and dealing in such a way that can affect my life as an employee, because the decisions they make determines whether I have a job tomorrow or not. And so I want to have as much freedom as possible. But the thing about freedom is that with great freedom comes great responsibility. And so that means making sure that my business is profitable. That means making sure that we are doing good on the customer service front. That means making sure that all of our debts are being paid. That means et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have the freedom to run my own business, but with that freedom comes great responsibility. The fact is, when you have politicians sitting up there talking about, if you vote for me, I'll create more jobs, that is a talking point that resonates with a lot of people who are looking for jobs. But be careful what you ask for, because to the extent that you vest and that you grant and that you give permission to the government and the corporations to get in bed with each other for the creation of jobs, you're in a sense setting up this kind of powder keg, because once the consumer is no longer interested in the product that you are creating, there goes that industry. I'm hoping what I'm saying makes sense, but again, there's a lot of complexity that's involved in this particular topic, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it's for me when I think about it. I know.
You kicked her off?
No, she just bounced out. Here she is.
I thought you got tired.
Oh my goodness.
Go ahead, Quisha.
Oh my gosh, the devil is busy. Anyway, I think about the when the left says that they want to create more jobs and stuff like that, like they mean a certain thing. When the right says it, typically not always, but typically, historically, I should say. Am I in here? Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see you fine. Go ahead.
I mean, everything is great.
Okay. Oh God, the storm is going.
But you shall persevere. Weepeth may endure
absolutely
for a night, but
joy
joy
comes in the morning.
But joy comes in.
We're gonna be all right.
Oh my gosh. What I'm trying to say is that it incentivizes you to not create a job on one hand, to be a strictly a worker, to work for somebody and not create for yourself. When you create for yourself, when you create your own, you have a more vested interest in actually figuring out, okay, who's about to get into office, what exactly are they doing? Because it means a bit more to you now, because taxes, because regulations, because of many different things. Now you're trying to figure out, okay, exactly what's going on. When you work for someone else, it gives you like this false sense of security that you really don't have to be kind of involved in those kind of things, because you don't feel it doesn't feel as directly like it's going to impact you, so much. And I think that's why. And also, if you are a person that is dependent on the government, because I knew people, especially during COVID, and during COVID, and even before, where the tax cuts and stuff that Trump had gave, and working people, you could see an increase in your paycheck and stuff like that. And I was speaking to someone who just completely relied on the government for their well-being, and was like, yeah, I don't think those couple extra $100, like, so what? That's not a big deal. It's like, first of all, you don't earn a dime. You don't earn a dime. So yeah, those couple extra $100 to people, that did mean something to them. And on the other side of that, the people providing the jobs, when you are a business owner, being able to, have extra funds being freed up because of the taxes and all that kind of stuff, you can plan and, do all these kinds of things. So the job creator and the employee were happy about these things, except for the person, who was totally dependent on the government. Anyway, I'm kind of distracted. I can't quite even get my thoughts together, but y'all do whatever you want with that.
But I mean, the thing is, like, when they talk about the first thing you brought up, which was the increase in depression, the use of self-medicating, opioids, so on and so forth. Yes, these are the I guess effects or byproducts of, if you will, of the emotions that people have, the feelings that people have, the things that people do, who are affected by these decisions. And again, like, not to sound like a victocrat leftist who say, oh, it's always someone else's fault, that the fact that these people are depressed because they've lost their jobs are someone else's fault. I'm not going to go that far, simply because you'll notice in the clip he said that more than half the population in Youngstown,
Yeah.
Ohio left. Well, who stayed behind? they were the unproductive element, or they were, I mean, I hate to use such terminology, but these are the facts. The people who were productive, the people who are going to, like, I want to land on my feet, I'm going to find a way. It sucks that I lost my job, but I'm going to go try to find something else. Those people left because there was nothing for them in Youngstown, Ohio. The leadership in Youngstown, Ohio made very poor decisions, and the town was decimated as a result of the decisions they made. But rather than being victims of someone else's decisions, the majority of the people left. And yes, there are people that stayed behind and they got addicted to drugs and they got depressed. You know, they were depressed, and there's violence and crime and this, that, and the third. But at the end of it all, the poverty isn't the cause of the crime. The values and the lack of character is a cause of the crime. And so and this is, I guess it all comes back full circle. What they will claim, what the left will claim, is that, see, because capitalism failed, because that the failing of the capitalism caused the poverty, now you have an increase of crime, therefore capitalism bad, therefore poverty, we need to get rid of it and give everybody equal rations. So you begin to see, I guess, their thought process, but the reality of it is, when you bring in the facts, you'll find that at the end of it all, character is at play here, not the mere existence of poverty.
Yeah.
And I was going to say what Chad said, that if you experience a hardship in life and your reaction is to, or your response is to do drugs or crime, then that's who you are. Because like he said, anybody that, if Youngtown was going down and you had to provide for your family, you would just leave. Like, you would go where the work was. You wouldn't stay there and just suffer and do drugs and try to get on well. I don't know. I'm just saying you would be industrious. So to me, people don't want to talk about it, but crime is, like he said, is a result of character. You think about it. Think about how much crime is in the inner cities, and then go to the poorest parts of America where white people are, where the children don't have any shoes on and the people with no teeth in their mouth and all that. The crime isn't the same. Now, yeah, they may be doing some meth, but the amount of crime is nowhere near the inner city. And those white people are even poorer than the folks in the inner city. So clearly that can't be the reason for the crime. And again, it is, like Chad says, a character issue. For your first response to adversity is to go take from somebody else or to go harm somebody else. That is a major character flaw. And then these folks getting on TV trying to justify it as if people with money don't do crime. There is a such thing called white collar crime. Like crime isn't even based on your economic status, because people do crime at all levels of their economic earnings, from the poorest of the poor, richest of the rich. So again, the foundation of this is we got to get rid of poverty. And how do you get rid of poverty? The only way to get rid of poverty, you got to create a system where everybody has the same. The only way to get rid of somebody having a lot more than somebody else is to give everybody the same. Even if that was achieved, right? Even if everybody made the same, you would still see the exact same social dynamics. You would still see people, even though everybody got the same check every month, you would see people have more and folks have less, just because it's human nature. You would find people that still want to be degenerates and folks still want to overachieve. So people will still find ways to get more money, and people will still find ways to be degenerates. Like, it just will happen. And you know what? A perfect game to describe that is Monopoly. If you play Monopoly, you can tell what type of person you're playing with. Because think about it. Some people are very non-risky, very conservative. I'm wrong. Okay, I'm abided, like very not non-risk taking. Then some folks gonna roll the dice. They're gonna try to buy everything, and then some people gonna keep losing. Like, you see different personality types, and guess what? But Monopoly, everybody started with the same amount of money, but somehow, some way, at the end of the game, somebody ends up owing all they have, and somebody ends up with all the money, and the game is over. Like, it's just human nature. So to try to make it like poverty is the cause of this is cap. It's cap.
You're muted, Quisha.
Sorry, that's why I was saying they start off with a bad premise. You know, the premise that they even start to even answer the question or to even try to describe the problem, you know, is flawed. You know, crime, it's like people, they spend so much time talking about history, the history of slavery, the history of slavery. Why you don't ever see that the poor people back then, they weren't committing all this crime? What, like that, to me, that would be very interesting. Okay, if poverty equals crime, let's go back in time and see where there was a bunch of poverty. What was the crime like then? You know, I don't hear these stories or these tests. Do y'all see these statistics thrown out there, like poverty from back in the day and crime back then? I don't even see people curious enough to ask that question. You know, what's up with that? Like that's why I say, like, are they really that stupid? Are you just really that evil? Or, you know, what is it? What is the thing? What is it? Because I feel like you can't be that dumb. So it's either evil or brainwashed.
I would say this. They believe that there is a so-called white power structure. They believe that white people, the white man, whatever, has run a wreck shop on the world. They believe that. And so even though they may not see it today, even though they have white friends and white lovers and husbands and spouses and wives and all that, even though all that exists, this is why they focus on history so much, because you can't really prove it in the present, but you can prove it in the past to a degree. I'm not saying even the past is true, it's still propaganda, but you can't always say, okay, there was slavery. That's something that you can't argue. Okay, there was racism. You can't argue that. Okay, there was lynching. You can't. So what they do is all of their stuff hinges on something you can't even correct, you can't fix. So it's almost like it'll never get solved and never go away. Exactly. Everything is in the past. You can't think about it. That's where Satan lives, though. The devil lives in the past. So the devil's telling you you can't change. There is no redemption. There is no salvation. You got to stay right here where you are and be condemned. And so what they're doing is they're saying that white people did all this atrocious stuff around the world, and they can't live it down. The only way to live it down is for a white person to say, here, take all that I have. And guess what? And then when that white person gives it all up and they're on the street homeless, they're still going to terrorize. You know why? Because they're going to drive by and say, wait a minute, why is that white person smiling and they're still homeless? Wait a minute, let me get all these cars. Let me make sure these white. Why are you over here smiling? What you smiling about? Listen, I'm just telling you, this is not going to go away. This anti-white stuff everybody's in on it. It's not going away. It's just not. I remember when Kendrick Perkins said that Jokic was going to win MVP because of white people voting for him. Mm-hmm. Right? And then when he just said it, then the media took hold. Everybody was saying, oh, it's racism. Oh, white people want to be MVP. So they literally gave Embiid the MVP. They just gave it to him. They literally gave him the MVP because they said that if Jokic got an MVP this third time, it was going to mean that it was racism. So to not be racist, to not be a racist league, they give it to Embiid just for Embiid to flounder out in the playoffs like a joke. Then the next year they give back to Jokic. And so, but my point is that just imagine what's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years. Think about Trump. When Trump is long gone, there's still going to be a MAGA movement, right? When Trump is off the scene, there will still be people talking about they MAGA, make America great again. They're going to be demonized because they're already telling you that if you even like Trump, you either racist or you a sellout or you know what I'm saying? So they're putting the stigma on Trump. And so when they removed Trump from Twitter, I told people, look at their precedent they're setting. They're setting a precedent with this. They're saying that if a person is white, even if they're the president, they can get this work. And so I think it's dangerous, and I think it's actually scary. And then people like me that actually go against it, I'm gonna be an enemy of the state, sticking up for the quote unquote white man. You know, I'm already the coon of the coons and Toms.
You're not a sovereign, Moorish, blackish. I don't know, whatever your thing.
All they're gonna be taken away from me, Keisha. They ain't gonna have that, Keisha. I ain't gonna be able to be Sovereign Moorish Hebrew Hotep Blanche. You know.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Let's see what else was on this lovely montage.
So I just wanted to read something real quick, if I can.
Okay.
So I actually read this because I did a video on. It was actually a response video to Killer Mike and Joe Rogan, where this subject came up over, and both Joe Rogan and Killer Mike agreed that poverty is what causes crime, and by reducing crime, you'll reduce poverty. So they both erroneously made that connection. And I did a response video, and in that video, I read an excerpt from this book by Marva Collins called The Marva Collins Way. I'm going to read it for y'all here right now. So Marva Collins, she was born and raised, I think, either in Mississippi or Alabama. I think it was Alabama, actually. And then she graduated and then moved to Chicago. And she makes a very interesting juxtaposition between Alabama and Chicago. Here's what she says. Let's see here. She said, the one thing everyone in Alabama had was pride. That pride was a consistent part of a Southern upbringing. The poor children came to school with neatly sewn patches on their clothes. Their clothes may have been old, but they were clean. If your children were dirty, you didn't belong anywhere near the social order of the town. If you had a dirty water bucket, you were a disgrace. And if you drank from the dipper instead of a glass, you were considered a heathen. If you didn't mow your lawn or clip your hedges, you were ostracized. When the neighbor next door saw you mowing your lawn, he would mow his lawn as well. And on Sundays after the church service, each family set out a picnic dinner, and everyone saw who had the best food. Neighborhoods like Garfield Park in Chicago. Neighborhoods in Garfield Park in Chicago are made up mostly of poor people from the South, like myself. I don't understand why my Southern pride stuck. I don't understand why my Southern pride stuck while theirs did not. Part of the problem is that people are looking for easy solutions. They have been led to believe that someone else is going to do things for them. Too many black people have fallen into the pattern of listening to the self-proclaimed leaders who find it in their own best interest to make people feel that there are free rides in this world. Sorry for butchering that text. But anyway, the point, folks, is that you had poor people who lived in Alabama, and you had poor people who lived in a more, I guess, urban kind of city there in Chicago. And she made the juxtaposition. She made she made a point to say, look, it was different because in Alabama, the people took pride in what they had and what they wore and how they carried themselves. There was respect, there was dignity. Whereas here in Chicago, none of that exists. People are walking around with holes in their clothes. People are being degenerates. People are being loud. And the difference, she says, is that in Chicago, people believe that there are free rides. People believe they believe the so-called race leaders. They believe the so-called pastors and ministers who are touting the social justice rhetoric, that there are free rides if you would but vote for me, if you would but vote for the candidates that we're putting forth, if you would but support this solution or this policy. And we all know, I mean, Chuck and I talked about this a few days ago. I think it was either me and him or someone or myself and Talib, that Chicago was a hotbed for organizing and for social justice and things of this nature. And so naturally, a lot of the people there in Chicago believed that if they organized, if they did what the so-called race leaders told them they should do, and building an army against the oppressor, building an army against the so-called white man, then and only then will their problems cease. The problem with that is when you put your trust and your hope in that, it de-incentivizes the character, it de-incentivizes the work ethic, it de-incentivizes what Marva Collins would call pride, although I wouldn't call it pride. But I get what she's saying. it de-incentivizes that to where you can just be a degenerate. You can just let it all hang out, right? You can just go your own way. And of course, I'm using terminology that became popular around this time. Let it all hang out, go your own way. This kind of rhetoric, these kind of slogans that paid homage to this new emerging spirit of self-indulgence that we saw there at the in the 70s, when she would have been the era that she's talking about here. And so there's the issue, believing that somebody else has the solutions to your problems. In the South, people didn't believe that someone else had the solutions to their problems. They would come to think that ultimately, the more the civil rights activists became more and more popular, but in like there, you know, in the 60s and going into the 70s, it took a while for this kind of mentality, this kind of rhetoric to take shape. And the reason for that is because there was still a strong religious conviction in the South, unlike the North. And so the North went first and the South went after, but it took a while for it to really take in the South, if any of that makes sense. But anyway, I just thought I would bring that up before moving on with the show. So looks like we have Chuck with us tonight.
Hey there.
Go ahead, Quisha.
What's up, yo?
Oh, no, I'm good. I'm still having some issues over here. So I don't know what I was going to say. Can you even hear me?
Yeah, I can.
We can hear you. We can see you. You look good. You sound good. All the things. Is this still coming down pretty hard over there in Jacksonville?
Yeah, it's a storm, and I'm already having technical issues, but I can't. You guys are frozen for me, so it's. So
okay, you want me to take over the hosting?
Yes.
Duties?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please do.
Okay.
And I'm going to jump out for a second because it's all messed up on my end. I'm going to jump out.
No, you're fine. Do your thing. What's up, Chuck?
What's happening, man? You all right?
Yeah.
Sorry, bro. Man, I was don't dock my pay, man. I was you know, my good buddy Sub-Zero, man, he been trying to get me on a live, and it's just been tough. You know, and you can attest how tough it is to line up and get you and I have tough time getting our schedules aligned. And we finally got a chance to do it, and you know, he wanted to talk about you know, Karl Marx or communism or Marxism and atheism, and my big mouth, man, you know how I get. We just talking. We went for like over 4.5 hours, and I looked up, and it was almost 7:30. I hadn't ate dinner. I hadn't showered. I hadn't done anything. I said, man, oh well. I'm sorry. I've been talking all day, man. I've been running my mouth all day.
So basically, what he's saying, chat, that he chose Sub-Zero over his CTTC family. That's what he's telling us. In the those of y'all, I know, right?
I violated the contract with you know, with the non-compete disclosure. I just violated it.
No, you're good. You're good. Did you catch any of our conversation? Okay.
No, not a single second. So I'm gonna just didn't hear anything. So I'm just gonna let you guys cook real fast, and I try to catch on to what's going on.
All right, Blanch, you want to catch us up on supers?
Okay. Oh, really? Thomas Sowell just made a video this past week. I'll make this sure that's the first one. Hold on. Let's make sure. All right, Thomas Sowell just made a video this past week about slavery not making America wealthy, nor white people. Thank you, really. Randall Hampton, thank you for the super sticker. Jesus loves you. God bless the chat. Quisha, Chad, Chuck, and Blanche. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jerome B, blessings. Thank you, Jerome. Jacob Jones, Chad's absolutely right. We have to learn that government has specific responsibilities and that we can't empower government to go beyond those bounds. Amen. Oh, really? I guess it's the title of the Thomas Sowell video, Debunking Myths or I guess on how slavery did not make any person rich. Thomas Sowell. I think that's it.
Day of work was January 17, 2023.
Robert Turner Jr. is the newest district attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, and he's inherited counties with unflattering titles, highest poverty rates in the state, highest violent crime rates per capita, higher than several other larger surrounding counties, including Montgomery. Do you think the poverty rate plays a part in crime?
I think that the poverty rate does play a large role in the amount of crime that we're seeing. There's not a lot of revenue coming in from existing businesses. Then those cities and those counties don't have enough money to outfit police departments that can handle the surges that we're seeing in crime. The state and the nation needs to take a look at what happens, because until we eliminate poverty, until we eliminate lack, crime will remain a question.
Foolishness.
So in other words, it's not their fault.
Correct.
That's basically what he's saying. Like we can't blame the people, even though spinning the block does not correlate with not having any money. I mean, instead of buying a gun or getting a bullet, you should have got something to eat if you're really that poor. But you know, it's just, I don't know, man. I think the culture. This is what Black culture is. It's always pointing the finger. It's always somebody else's fault. It's never just I messed up. It's never just my cousin did 23 years in prison. I look up, he hugging Gavin Newsom. I'm like, dude, what the heck? It's just I can't believe it. And then he wanted to argue with me about, he said that slavery destroyed the Black family, and I said that's not true. I said there were Black families during slavery, so that's just not, it's not true. So that he says that basically he don't want to even engage me because he don't want to go out on my level, stoop down and make the point. But anyway, he was hugging Gavin Newsom, so I just want to put that out there. But yeah.
Well, he certainly didn't go to prison and receive any sort of conservative insight. Unfortunately, he probably went to prison, and of course they pander to that kind of mentality, that sort of thinking, it's not your fault. They pick up all of this revolutionary literature, all this Marxist literature, this sort of pseudo, I call it theopolitical. They become members of these various theopolitical movements, say like Islam or Black Hebrew Israelitism and these sorts of things. And so a lot of times these people, they come out of prison even more radical. But but like I said, it may have been the last show. It's funny, I don't, these people, especially these politicians, they talk like, I don't know, they talk like productivity, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about wealth, we're talking about an economy, right? Your wealth is defined by how much you produce. Where do these politicians think wealth comes from, right? Someone has to produce it. And if you do not address the crime, if you do not address the violence, no one who even has the wherewithal to produce would even consider doing so, because they would do so at great risk. And you do have some folk, particularly people who come from other parts of the world, and this has been a main point of that contention. I know I see it here, living in the Detroit area, right? The majority of, say, gas stations and liquor stores are owned by people who are not native to this country. They're not Black. Some of them may be native. They may be a generation or two in, but their parents or grandparents certainly weren't American. They're Arabs and Indians, and we see that, for example, folks of certain Asian extraction, they have pretty much cornered the Black cosmetic market and all these things. And when you look at it, and they do these things at great cost to their person and to their property, because it can be very, very dangerous. Black folks resent that. They resent the fact that they can open a business in their own neighborhood. And then they come up with these cockamamie, unfounded conspiracies. Now I even hear people like folks like Umar Johnson peddling in this nonsense that some way, somehow the government sets them up in such a way that gives them a leg up. And so you have a person actually providing you with a service in your neighborhood, gas, the local bodega, whatever. Not saying that they sell the healthiest stuff, but I mean, if there's a market for it, you go in there, you spend your money. No one made you go in. And so you have people who are providing you with a service, and blacks in the neighborhood, especially, your militant types, your bug out types, right? This is the stereotype or the archetype of bug out in the film Do the Right Thing. Or you look at this kind of mentality. I may have mentioned in the past the opening scene of the film Menace to Society. This is what this was meant to communicate, right? This sort of the ethnic animus between black residents and these sort of property owning interlopers who mistreat the blacks because they look down upon them and such and so forth. And so blacks get angry and they look at it like, well, we're being exploited. They don't look at it like, well, we're offering them a service, providing them with the service. No, it's we're being exploited because that business should be ours, right? We want some black people on the wall, to quote Bug Out. So people just, if you do not, it's you the social creature, it's you the human being, it's you the person. Clean up your culture, or else people they will not deal with you. And that's just the way it is. Fixed poverty. Where do you think this wealth comes from? It comes from people who can either choose to do it or they can choose not to.
As you said, I mean, in the clip when the guy says like, the businesses, they're not able to pay. He didn't use, to his credit, he didn't use the terminology fair share, although I think he would have used it if that would have came to mind whenever he was being interviewed. But he said, the revenue wasn't enough to pay for the uniforms and to pay for the equipment that we need as police officers to deal with this surge of crime. And again, like it goes back, Chuck, to what I was talking about earlier. You weren't here, but we played a clip just to, I guess, bring you up to speed. We played a clip where they were talking about Youngstown, Ohio, and how it used to be a steel manufacturing town. And around the 70s, a lot of these jobs began to go by the wayside, and now the town is desolate. So it went from being a booming, very wealthy town because it was manufacturing steel to all of a sudden post World War II, when folks aren't buying steel anymore like that, the town is pretty much depleted and desolate. And I made the point to say that there's a lot of factors going on there, but one of which is poor city planning.
That's right.
Putting all of your eggs in one basket economically. That's not the way to develop or design or plan a town. And so the fact is, when I look at what was this, Dallas County, Alabama, and you look at a lot of the crime and stuff that's going on, I refuse to believe that the mere existence of poverty is why you have all this crime. The fact is, you have the crime is the thing that comes first, and then the poverty. The crime is the thing that comes first, and then the closing down of businesses. The crime is the thing that comes first, and what comes before the crime? Poor character, bad culture. That's what comes before the crime. And then two, even the poor planning politicians are the fault of poor character, the fault of the people who live in the town. Because the fact is, they wouldn't be in office if it weren't for the townspeople who voted to put them in office to do the poor planning. And so really what it comes down back to, folks, is that person in the mirror. We can blame politicians who are blue in the face. We can blame the white man. We can blame this. We can blame that. But it's really your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault, because we're not man enough. We don't take as much responsibility as we ought to take. Like, that's really what it boils down to. And yes, like it sucks that they're sending jobs overseas, and again, the governments are in bed with corporations and they're playing fast and loose with people's jobs. Like, yes, that's true, but they're in office because you put them there. That's a tough pill for folks to swallow, but really it is what it is.
Right.
And not only that, Chad, I guess I won't get too detailed, but if you look at even in my home city, you know, a place like Detroit, it just speaks to the negative effect that employee-based collective bargaining has on the economy, that it has on the market.
Unions.
It's unions that drove out these corporates. People don't understand how this happened and why it happened. I'm coming in late, so I don't know what has already been said and what has already been talked about. So I don't want to rehash anything that's already been said. I just want to sort of put that a point out there. That people just don't understand a basic economics. So why in the world do you think that you are owed a living wage or something to that effect, whatever they're calling it nowadays, by doing something extremely simple or low tech, as they say? Economies aren't meant to remain stagnant in that way. You yourself have to adapt your life and try to curate your decision making based upon information that you see in the so-called economy, as we like to call it, because an economy, aside from all of the inner esoteric sort of economic terms that you see thrown about whenever an economy is discussed, essentially what you're looking at is human beings disseminating knowledge to and fro. We're communicating with each other through the economy. And it is your job as an individual to determine how best to make yourself useful to your fellow man. If factory workers are no longer needed as they once were, all right, then it's your job to find what skills are now marketable. You can't simply say, well, I used to do this and I want this to stay here into perpetuity because this is what I do. It doesn't work like that. That's not how it works. Anyway, that's all I'll say. I won't keep beating that drum.
So Chuck asked a question. He said, where does wealth come from? And wealth comes from oppression. Wealth comes from white people oppressing other people to get wealth. And so, no, people don't respect wealth. Wealth is already seen as something negative and then when black people get wealth, they say it's because they were let or allowed to have the wealth. So this whole notion of wealth is never seen as anything that's positive or anything that's even possible. Wealth is accrued by somebody being taken advantage of, either through slavery, oppression, colonialism, whatever is the reason. That's where wealth comes from. And so that's why it's so easy for the left or people on the left or even black people to be against it. That's why it's so easy to adopt something where you want to get handouts because you don't have a favorable opinion about wealth. And so, and even think about the black church. The black church, for the most part, besides the mega churches, they're always penny pinching. They're always scrounging up money to do this and do that. They never have enough. And so even when it comes to a relationship between money, wealth, and even the faith of their religion, it's still a very negative relationship. You hear this saying, they say, well, money's the root of all evil. And the Bible says actually that it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. So what really causes people to suffer really is greed. It ain't just capitalism. What they try to say is really just people being greedy or trying to get over. But when you asked that question, I just thought about everybody's idea of how people are rich. Even when they see somebody that is rich, they automatically think they got that money by taking advantage of something. They never think that this person started from the ground up. And I remember I talked to Jacob the Jeweler one time, and he said when he was 17 years old, he used to go to all the watch shops and get all their spare parts to make watches. And then he said by the time he was like 18, he had like a whole bunch of people working for him. But he said, I started out poor though. But like people would look at him and think he's been rich the whole time, but not actually. Actually, he came from the bottom, like I like to say. He came from, the difference is his come from the bottom was through actually finding a need in society, which is timepieces. Your come up was either sports, music, something that doesn't really require you to get. No, I won't say sports doesn't, but you get my point. My point is that they don't respect how wealth is acquired or accrued. They don't. I think it's just all through oppression. And so when you bring it up to them, they already have a negative connotation associated with getting wealth.
Mm-hmm. Somebody, I saw a couple of people in the comment section. You guys may have covered this, just talking about, I guess, public housing projects and just with the violence. Did you guys talk about that, about the violence
in the chat
in public housing? I saw that conversation in the chat, so I thought you guys may have talked about it. So okay, never mind.
No, I'm trying to stay out of the chat, the comment section until we get to like supers and stuff like that. So as to not in the conversation. No offense to y'all in the chat, but sometimes y'all be talking about something completely off topic. So that's why I try to stay out of it for the most part. I mean, unless there's something, Chuck, that you saw that's relevant to the conversation, then I don't mind going there. But if not, then I have a couple of other clips. It sounds like it's something that piqued your interest. If you want to comment on it.
Just somebody had just real quick that there wasn't a lot of violence. Pretty much, I guess, in the comment section, I'm assuming they were speaking to the fact that the presence and prevalence of violence is more so a character issue, of course, than an economic one. When you look at Karl Marx and his worldview, I've been talking about Marx all day, Jesus. Of course, one's individual orientation is the product of, or it flows downstream from his class conception. The change in the means of production sort of brings about a new paradigm wherein people are shifted into very specific roles that then go on to, of course, define their outlook. And so we say, well, that's nonsense. Behavior is a cultural issue. You didn't have these problems in the United States with crime prior to the 1960s. And I just saw a few people commenting on that, some stories that Dr. Thomas Sowell tells, some stories that the late Walter E. Williams tells. They both grew up in a public housing project. And it's interesting because when the public housing project experiment first launched, during the days of FDR, it's funny because the federal government, because the whole claim was that the private sector had let the people down, right? And this is when you begin to see the brewing of this idea that everyone deserves adequate housing. But the government-based subsidized housing did the exact same things that they accused those of the private sector of doing, which was being extremely selective on who they allowed to occupy these housing projects. And so you had to meet very, very specific criteria. And that's the whole part that they ignore, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of people in the beginning, and this is even before a lot of our public housing projects became predominantly Black, because at the time, 30s, 40s, a lot of these housing projects were built, they were multi-ethnic. But a lot of these people, they were ex-military, because there was this partnership, if you will, between the United States military and this newly established a bureau of public housing. And so public housing was initially, or those who got first dibs on public housing were former World War II veterans for the most part. And in many cases, for example, you had to be married in order to, so there had to be a man, there had to be a husband and a wife, there had to be a man and a woman in the home. They even went so far as to comb over your children's academic records to make sure they were studious and that they got good grades. And I mean, there were a ton of things that they did. And so once these individuals who probably had the requisite skills, talents, and social and cultural capital to make it in spite of the fact that they were given this, free or subsidized housing from the government. What the government then did was it came in and it took credit for their ability to transcend out of that predicament. And then that's when they began to lower the bar, because the popular attitude amongst the technocrats and bureaucrats of the time was that we help them, so let's lower the standard to help the other folk who also deserve the same opportunities that we gave those other folk. But odds are, had the government just not gotten involved, those other folks would have made it anyway. And so you began to see a rougher, tougher, more ghetto element going into these public housing projects, but that wasn't necessarily the case in the beginning. But when government is in control, like all other things, it just goes to hell. So that's a huge part of the story as far as what happened and why the housing projects across America became so dangerous.
That's true.
Parents are repeat ex-offenders, and almost half of my brothers have spent time in incarceration. The system is broken at every single angle. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to oppress and criminalize Black and brown folks.
Person's poverty is another person's paycheck. And that's the American way. That's as American as apple pie. We shouldn't have to acknowledge that trauma because they're paid to be there. We live in these places. Police officers have historically not been held accountable because they protect and serve the rich, and then they just harass and take up space in poor communities.
Right.
How do we start to build towards changing that culture, and what does that conversation look like on a national scale?
What creates safe communities is recognizing that undiagnosed and untreated trauma among children who are growing up in high violence communities or in poverty, because by the way, poverty is trauma inducing.
Yeah, it is. Poverty is violence, right?
I think part of the issue is that in some people's mind, the only way you achieve safe communities is to have a law enforcement presence.
For white communities.
It's crazy.
Right, but the point being that we have to reorder how people understand safe happens. Yeah. Safe happens by having, resources in a community. Safe happens by addressing undiagnosed and untreated trauma. Safe happens by having, literally economic opportunities. Among what we should think about as civil rights is the right to everybody to live in a safe community. And so then how do we achieve that? And if we think about it that way, then we understand, well, that's not going to be about reacting to crime after it happens. That's going to be about preventing it before it does. And then you don't have to be really creative to figure out what prevention looks like. It looks like putting those kinds of resources into a community.
Right. How do we address the crime? Well, we address the crime by acknowledging the crime. It reminds me of that clip when they asked her about inflation, and she goes on for the next 5 to 10 minutes trying to explain what inflation is. It's like, I didn't ask you to define it. I asked you what you plan on doing about it. But, how do we fix crime? Well, we need to deal with this. What undiagnosed trauma or just okay, so we don't deal with crime by taking those who commit crime off the streets. That won't fix crime. It's just funny how these folks go down the street and around the corner about it when the simple answer is staring you right in the face. Oh man. And then this guy says that, what did he say? One person's poverty is another person's profit or paycheck. He's right. He is absolutely right when he says this, but he's right in ways that he doesn't even understand. You are doggone right. There is a poverty industry. Show is. And guess what? You sitting adjacent to somebody who was one of the primary profiteers
Bingo.
Of this poverty industrial complex.
Bingo.
Silly.
What I found funny was the young lady said that all of her brothers were incarcerated and she never thought to blame the household. Like if all your brothers went to prison, then something is going on at home. You can't just say the system failed and all of your brothers went to prison. Not one, but all of them went. So I don't know. I just think, again, the premise is that black people are perfect. If white people don't get involved, black folks will go to school, black folks will invent, black folks will build, and white people, but for some reason, when white people are present, black folks can't do anything. They fall to the system. They gotta do drugs, they gotta do crime, they can't go to school, they can't go to work. I don't know, it's just crazy. Then the dude says poverty is violence. So what I find funny about that is that, so let me get this straight. So poverty itself, poverty is violent to you. So again, who is causing the poverty? You're not causing it. So again, it points back to white people. Like for you to say poverty is violence, now you're really saying that white people are able to be violent through economic oppression. And I'm like, and again, these black people, and I'm gonna say this, black people have the greatest privilege on the planet Earth.
That's
a
right.
black person can get in front of a microphone and say the most outlandish and ridiculous things, and nobody questions it. Nobody says that sounds crazy. Nobody says grab the mic. Nobody says shut up. Nothing. This man just said, think about what Kamala said, the girl said, the guy said, and the other guy said. Think about what they all said, and there wasn't any pushback. Come on, man. It's crazy, man. Come on. Poverty is violence. You walking outside, you getting beat up. First Kamala said poverty is trauma-inducing. Then he went from trauma-inducing to violence. What's next? Poverty is gonna kill you? I mean, what's next? Come on.
It make no mistake about it, Blanche. Just like you said, bruh, these black folks of today are some of the most, like you said, privileged, the most materially wealthy human beings that have ever existed.
Well fed, very well
Well
fed.
fed. They have no idea what real suffering, what real poverty, and these sorts of things look like. As I mentioned before, even going all the way back to the turn of the 20th century, going from the 19th into the 20th century, a lot of some folks who were alive back then were old enough to have been born into slavery. But even during that time, even not during that time, but let's even go back a few decades prior, right? When slavery was still a thing throughout the American South. Even slaves, in many instances, were a lot wealthier, better fed, and all these sorts of things than their European counterparts across the Atlantic. Folks have no idea about the droughts, the starvation, the famines, and all these things that swept across Ireland and Scotland and various parts of Europe. Again, they have no idea. But again, it's just the story, bro. It never gets told in its totality. It's like I don't know. You know, we talk about trauma inducing. I feel traumatized because I can't deal with these lies, man. It's just it's crazy, man. There is no excuse whatsoever for the kind of wanton violence you see in America's inner cities. It's no excuse for it, none whatsoever.
And how about the optic of a presidential contender sitting up there listening to this mess and agreeing with it?
Right.
Right. I think that's not, that doesn't strike people. I mean, like listening to what they're saying about how, basically what they're saying in a nutshell is that the problems of the black poor are the white man's fault. The problems of the criminal element of the inner city black culture is the white man's fault. It's to Blanchard's point, it's the white man's fault that my brothers who spun the block and robbed the bank and held up an old lady. It's the white man's fault that those things happened. It's not the fault of what happened in the household. It's not the fault that that our family didn't have any values or principles. It's not the fault of an absentee father or whatever the case may be. It's somehow the white man's fault. And there's people that genuinely believe this. You might remember, Blanche, there's so-called Republicans and MAGA people that believe this too, believe it or not. You might remember, Blanche, I shared with you the clip of, what's that guy's name? Cash Kelly. He and Deontay Blade Ford were on a live together. And this was comical to me, at least. But But Deontay Blade Ford was basically saying the same things that we say here on Cutting Through the Culture. That he was talking about personal responsibility, and he was talking about how Black folks like to blame the crack epidemic and the crack era when the reality of it is it comes back to character. It comes back, And then Cash Kelly, again, MAGA Republican, said no. They put the drugs in the community. They did this to that to us. That the reason why Black men started selling drugs is because white folks didn't want to hire Black folks because of a white lash from the civil rights movement, right? Martin Luther King got up there, he marched, he did this, he did that. And I'm just giving you the gist. Of course, I'm not quoting these guys verbatim, but basically the whole notion, the whole concept is Martin Luther King got up there and marched. He won great strides for Black folks in America. We were now considered equal, but the white private sector underwent this kind of backlash where they refused to hire Negroes, and because Negroes couldn't find jobs, they resorted to selling drugs. And it just so happened that the government planted all these drugs in the hoods, and so it's still the government's fault. And you got again these Republicans believing this, and so anyway, my point in saying that is this narrative that the happenings of the criminal element or the impoverished element, or I wouldn't say so much impoverished as much as we'll say unproductive, the unproductive element of so-called Black culture, the notion that it's somehow the white man's fault is something that you hear all over the place. And to see a contender for the presidential, I guess the executive branch, sitting up there listening to this mess and agreeing with it, that whole optic is very eerie to me.
I mean, Chad, and I think too, man, and we covered some of this when it was just you and I a couple of days ago, but the discontent, the seeds that were sown as a result of the civil rights movement, when a lot of these riots sprung out, and it's funny because you mentioned this earlier, just about this kind of difference between North and South. I think I heard you say that you still had a more vibrant and rich religious tradition, a truly Christian tradition in the South than you did in the North. But a lot of these race riots, as they like to call them, I mean, they spread like wildfire across America's North. And yes, you had, Chad, you talked about in the past, you talked about the Freedom Riders and these kind of things, people going down into the South. And people in the South, they despised the presence of these agitators coming into the South. They hated it. And I mentioned that because at the time before the breakout of all of these riots in the 60s, I remember one of the first big major riots happened after the 1964 civil rights legislation was passed. The big riot that happened in Harlem in 1964 as a result of the death of a man named James Powell. Some of you are probably familiar with the 1964 James Powell riot in Harlem, New York. Well, a lot of that stuff, and it's funny because I used to grow up, man, and my father used to tell me things, and I used to be like, and I used to just listen to him. You know, he would tell me about how the city of Detroit looked. We had this area, and it was probably a common like nickname for the predominantly Black area of the city. It was a city in Detroit called Black Bottom. You know, if you're from Detroit, you know the Black Bottom area. And my father talked about how certain high schools in Detroit were predominantly white, and there was some that were predominantly Black. And it was funny growing up and at that time and seeing this way the city looked, and I just couldn't imagine like this high school. I mean, this roughest high, like this was a white school. He's like, you know, yeah. But he said to me, you know, he remembers the riots in Detroit in '67 as a kid, and he would tell me things like, son, like since that day, or however long it lasted, those few days. And Detroit was a shining city on a hill for Black people back then. He said to me, he said, son, it's parts of this city, when you see these abandoned buildings and blocks with no homes and just unmanicured grass and stuff just growing out of control, just he said that area has looked like that since the late 60s. Since the riots, many parts of the city have never recuperated. Much of the city does not look the same. And that's true not just in Detroit, but in other cities where similar riots occurred. Once that happened, the writing was on the wall. People could hear, they could see, they could sense what was happening. And they left and they never came back, both blacks and whites, because we talk about the growth of the black middle class, right? This new black bourgeoisie. I mean, of course, there have been black bourgeoisie for hell going back to the 19th century, but in the 1960s, 1970s, even blacks were saying, oh, no, we out of here. And it just, many of these urban cities just have not been the same since. Have not been the same since. People left and they never came back because they don't have to deal with that.
Right? Chad, you had that clip of that guy blaming, like he said that his brothers didn't have a choice. He was listening to all the stuff they did. He's like, they didn't have a choice. It was just, they had to do the crime. The guy. Oh, let me see.
Family grew up in Harlem. My family is from Harlem. So I've had my brothers be swallowed by the mass criminal industrial complex. People were forced to do things that were not of their best interest, specifically sell drugs, right? So I've had brothers have to do things that, and I've had the conversations with them that they wish they didn't, have to do. But at that time, they were literally forced. They couldn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. They were hungry at nights, going to sleep, eating dreams, literally eating dreams. And then have to go to school the next day and try to learn something. It's almost an impossible task, right? So then they become, all right, what's around me? What can I do to make money? Because I realized something. Being poor in America is one of the hardest things to do in this country. And if you feel like you're poor, you feel like you have nothing, you will do anything to get that. Poverty produces crime. That's just a simple fact.
So again, because he's black, people will listen to him and think he's telling the truth. What I find interesting is that I grew up in the crack era, so I remember who was selling drugs and how it was being sold. Nobody sold drugs because they wanted to just buy a meal. And they were selling drugs with goals of being the kingpin, with goals of being the boss, with goals of being the guy. Like, again, if this was a true statement, then it would be like a Robin Hood scenario where folks would be selling drugs and just to feed. That wasn't what's going on. Along with selling drugs came also murders. It came also prostitution. It came also crack, mothers being on crack. It came also children selling drugs. So there was a whole ripple effect from, it wasn't just I'm selling drugs to eat. It was an entire new type of way of living was created, where it was drug addicts and all this stuff. And so this notion is that people are righteously committing crime is a lie. But that ain't my issue, what he said. My issue is that he can go to almost any black space and say what he said, and black folks will stand up and applaud him for what he just said. And it's just a bold-faced lie. There's nobody is doing a righteous crime. Nobody. Yeah, at worst case scenario, you would go to God. I mean, if all else fail, you just say, Lord, help me. Or you go to a shelter, or you go to a whatever. They got food lockers in the cities. They got all kind of programs you can go to get your basic needs met, even clothes. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. The way he was talking, he was just trying to justify what these people were doing, knowing good and well people were dying behind this. We're not just selling drugs, people are losing their life. We're talking about kids getting shot. We're talking about shootouts. We're talking about war zones behind this selling drugs. So again, if he says that same speech in front of black folks, standing ovation.
It's funny to me too, especially then thinking about the 80s, the crack era. I mean, these are the same black people who sat up there and caped for Fidel Castro. I mean, this is going all the way back to the 1960s, and Malcolm X inviting him up to Harlem, and all these other sorts of things. The reason why I even bring up Fidel Castro, because it just always boggles my mind. You have people who talk about the crack era, and what they're talking about. Of course, they're talking about the decade of Iran Contra, and the Reagan foreign policy dedicated to thwarting communism in Latin America. And these people who go about talking about the crack era and about how the United States did this deliberately for the purpose of trying to destroy the Black community. Well, tell me, what exactly was Fidel Castro and Che Guevara trying to do in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis? What would have happened to the Black community then? Again, these people don't even know exactly what was at stake, due to the one domino after another falling in Latin America, thanks to Castro's regime and his Soviet backers in Latin America. But again, they talk about that they had no choice. They had to sell drugs, as if like you're that important. You're that important. We want to stop you because we just hate Black people, right? This is about racism, after all, don't you know? These people are crazy, man. And you see how soft he sound, Blanche? Just
and think about even the think about this, even the difficulty in selling. Like, people think you gotta, selling drugs ain't easy.
Right.
You gotta be able to dodge the cop, not get robbed. I mean, it's a lot of stuff that goes into selling. It ain't just, so to me,
yeah.
Why would you pick to do that? Well, that'd be the hardest thing to do, to try to make some money.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second.
No.
Chuck, you said something about slavery earlier. I was actually having a conversation with my wife. She's not gonna like that I'm telling you all this, but I was having a conversation with my wife yesterday. I was like, you know what? Like, I think I would have owned slaves prior to the 1860s.
Yeah, man.
I genuinely do. I think I would have owned slaves. I mean, check this out. Let's see here. Let me share my screen.
Oh man!
Like, look at this flyer right here. All right, great sale of slaves. Right, $3, aged from 20 to 26, strong, able-bodied. One wench, Sally, age 42, excellent cook. One wench, Liza, age 23, with a 6-month-old pickaninny. $1, age 52, good kennelman. $17, age from 12 to 20, excellent.
I mean, I'll take them. I'll take them. Sold. The great deal. Give me a deal.
I mean, like, for me, because the thing is, like, I have a rather large, well, not large, bigger than I guess a neighborhood lot. It's just an acre and a half, but anyway, large for someone like me who's very busy to keep up with. And I was thinking to myself, like, it would be nice if I just had some hands, you know what I'm saying, to work and to keep the property clean and manicured and all the things. And the more I thought about it, it was a mutually beneficial relationship between master and slave, because the slave, they didn't have to pay rent, they didn't have to, scout for food or anything like that. Like, that was all this stuff was provided for them. Yeah. And everybody knows how people are struggling to pay rent these days, right? And then the master, he got basically, all of his land tilled and crops harvested and all the things, and didn't have to pay like a hourly wages, and didn't have to worry about income tax and employer tax, and didn't have to worry about 1099s and W-2 forms and all of this. And my wife, she thought I was joking at first, but the more I explained it, she was like, "Oh, you're actually not joking." I'm like, "No, think about it. Slavery existed for most of humanity." Like, slavery, like, people don't understand this. Slavery existed for most of humanity, and the fact is, this kind of new, like, free market economy that we have is a very new phenomenon. People just don't understand how new this phenomenon is. And the fact is, like, obviously, joking aside, I take the free market system over, having to sell oneself into slavery or indentured servanthood. But at the same time, you see all these people talking about, struggling to pay bills, living paycheck to paycheck, this, that, and the other. And typically these people are more likely to side with a more Marxian way of thinking. These are the types that are a Democrat's rhetoric, a Democrat's speeches resonates with them because they're tired of having to break their backs to make a living, because making a wage, earning a wage is hard, right? I think that guy in that clip, he said something reminiscent of that. It's hard to be poor in America is the terminology that he used. It's hard to be poor in America. And I don't know about you all, Chuck and Blanche, but for me, it's like I used to be homeless. You know what I mean? It was for about 6 months, but I didn't have a dime to my name. I was living out of my vehicle. The money that I was making, I had to put toward gas to get to work. I had to put toward, just the basic things that make a living. That sucked. Like, it sucked bad. I didn't want to keep living like that. And so I was able to find a job, and then I was able to get into a trade, and I was able to ultimately start a business. And that's the way that it works, because you utilize the opportunities that are before you. And so we know that the free market works. We know that when one determines to seize opportunities and to make a way for themselves in America, you can do it. And so when I see that guy on the screen talking about being poor is hard in America, it's like, I don't have any sympathy for you, because I'm a living example of how it works. And so for me, it's like, what do you want? And it seems to me that they want to go back to slavery. Like, you want to go back to slavery because if being poor is hard and you don't want to take advantage of the opportunities that are available, then what is it that you want? What do you want from me, the taxpayer? What do you want from the government, who is subsidized by me, the taxpayer? What do you want from the politicians who are elected by all of us? Like, what do you want? You want to be taken care of, because that's slavery. So you can't, on the one hand, say you're against slavery, but then talk as if you want slavery. If you want slavery, I'm happy to go back to that, and I'll happily purchase you, but you have to be willing to work. But I mean, to me, it's like, you wouldn't even make a good slave, because all you do is all you're doing is sitting up there complaining. But I mean, in all seriousness, it's that, I don't know. Like, for me, I think when we hear about slavery, it's typically this kind of roots version of slavery, where you got Negroes working in the field with no shoes on, picking cotton with their bare hands, some white man on the back of a horse with a whip, beating the backs of these Negroes, pick that cotton. That's what people think of when they think of slavery, but the facts are contrary to the narrative. And again, I talked about this at great length, so I won't bore you all with it again. But again, I'll just leave it here. When it comes to slavery, first of all, it's far more complex than what you read about in your history books. Most of y'all didn't read the history books. You just maybe cheated off of your neighbor, or you just took the narrative that was given to you by your teacher, and you answered the answers on the test. But you didn't actually look into this to see if the facts square with what the narrative is. Am I advocating for slavery in all seriousness? No, but my thing is, like, know what you want. Know what you want. If you want Marxism, just say that. I can tell you that it won't work, and I can give you example after example after example historically how it hasn't worked. But the fact is, like, you either have to work to make a living, or you're going to depend on somebody else. And depending on somebody else, that's a system, and that's a society that is destined for destruction. Go ahead, guys.
Chad, and when I hear that, and I think about, the compromise that was made in Great Britain, and I think William Wilberforce, and there was another abolitionist who, I guess, regretted their decision to, and when I'm talking about the compromise, I'm talking about paying slave owners, or former slave owners. We talk about reparations, right? Reparations. And I once, long time ago, said on a live stream on Instagram, I was going off script and just, ranting about some things. I remember I was responding to that. I guess it was a podcast or a conversation that was taped at the time. This was back in 2022, 2021, a conversation between Bruce Springsteen and Barack Obama. And I don't know if you all have ever heard that conversation. It'll drive you up a wall to hear the two of them talking. And I said, if anyone is deserving of reparations, it is the slave owner. And people were kind of taken aback in the section. I said, they're the ones who deserve reparations, because they're the ones, if you're talking reparations, they are the ones that had their property or the right to own said property taken from them. You don't have to like the fact, look at it dispassionately and get about your feelings, as we like to say, because that's just the way it was. Human beings were property. That's the way it was at the time. It's no different from anything that you own now. If the government were to just come along and say, guess what? I'm not getting into any sort of climate change conversation, but just, for a car, for example, say, well, you can't own that. The car is no longer property, but I bought it. I haven't paid it off. As a matter of fact, I still own it. Are you going to compensate me for the loss of what was once mine? When I bought it, it was legal. You just illegalized it. Now, who's going to compensate me for the property that I have lost? You can't then say, well, first and foremost, you're talking reparations. Exactly who you're going to tax and why, I don't know. But you can't say, well, we're going to tax a person punitively for something that they had nothing to do with. But let's just pretend for a second, if you could find a way to only tax the descendants of those who actually owned slaves. Again, you need to be paying them and not taxing them, because you cannot punish them for participating in an activity that was legal at the time. Because I like to use a quote I heard from Larry Elder, and that is, the state cannot exact retroactive justice. It can only be just in its time. The state can only deal with the factors in its time. It can't go back and fix the past. It doesn't work that way. And like I said, hypothetically speaking, if you were going to try, the slave descendants aren't old. The descendants of the slave masters are actually old, because they're the ones who lost or had a decrease in their wealth, so to speak, because they're the ones who lost their property. And just lastly, once again, with this whole crack thing, I couldn't remember his name, but I don't know if you all are familiar with Black Caesar. His real name was Frank Matthews. When you hear people talk about drug dealers, they talk about Frank Lucas. But prior to Frank Lucas, there was another drug kingpin named Frank. His last name was Matthews. And he was so powerful. He was probably the most powerful drug trafficker in all the country, even surpassed in many respects the mafia. Even the mafia, the five families of New York sort of feared him. And that's how powerful he was. And his heyday existed between 1960 and 1973. He was finally caught and captured and indicted in 1973. And Truster is going to sound like some magical spook stuff out of a movie, but Frank Matthews disappeared after his arrest. And to this day, the authorities don't know if Frank Matthews is alive or dead. He's been missing ever since. Last I checked, we still haven't found him. And, you have a lot of conspiracy theorists that believe, of course, that Frank Matthews he too was on the government payroll, and the government conveniently disappeared him, set him up, gave him a new identity, gave him a whole new life. And Frank Matthews and those who were affiliated in some way with him later on, of these figures like Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes, and a lot of these guys, a lot of these figures would later go on to have close association with members of the Black Panther Party on both coasts, but especially New York City, where a lot of this stuff took place. And they claim, of course, that Frank Matthews and his ilk, and even there are accusations out there that Nicky Barnes was in fact the government asset. And the whole point of it all was to destabilize the Black Panther cause and the whole revolutionary movement, to get them off the righteous path, to get them all hooked on drugs, and to get them focused on criminality as opposed to this social, this revolution, this righteous revolution. So my point is saying all that is, I'm just giving you guys some little trivial facts here. But yeah, the fact of the matter is that there were a lot of blacks who were involved in criminality long before the 1980s. Drug dealing was a big thing amongst black criminals, even as far back as the 1960s. And if you need evidence of that, just read over the life of Black Caesar.
Yeah. Black folks are always trying to get some kind of big conspiracy when it comes to degeneracy. They always trying to make something seem more grand than it is. I'm gonna just say this: there don't need to be no big government conspiracy for black folks to do what's wrong. Decadency and degeneracy come quite naturally for black people. So you don't have to. The government ain't got to get involved. CIA, FBI, y'all do just fine on your own. But again, you know, this notion that they were forced to sell drugs, insanity. It is insane. Even if they brought drugs into the community, even if they dropped it off at your front door, you ain't got to sell it, and you sure ain't got to smoke it.
But Blanche, but see, you know, criminality it's been with us since the beginning of time. But what's crazy is that it isn't so much the drug dealing, as I mentioned prior to on this show as well, that it wasn't the drugs per se, it was the crime. Even when the violence, should I say, because selling drugs is a crime, but the violence. When the violence began to spill over into the street, and the tax-paying citizens came to the realization that there was no real honor amongst thieves, that there was no code amongst these thieves, then all bets were off. And a lot of the draconian, the drug enforcement laws and all these things that were implemented by racist Democrats because they want to just lock people up, that's not true. A lot of the Democrats were responding to the needs of a lot of their constituents because they were, quite frankly, sick and tired of all of the crime. It wasn't the drug dealing. Even when you listen to, that just goes to show you, again, the lack of moral character. Even you can say, well, to sell drugs is wrong, so you lack character, and that, because of that. But, yet still you would say certain things like certain drive-bys, kidnapping children, the elderly, leave women out of it, leave children out of it, leave the elderly out of it. Even the Italian mafia, for example, had rules. That's why they created the commission, right? Because these sorts of things are bad for business, because the criminal element will never outnumber the majority of those in the society. But black folks didn't care. Everybody was fair game. And that's what led to the harsher punishment, because you'll hear this is part of the narrative too. This is what led to the harsher punishment for hard crack cocaine, because the black criminals were far more violent. When you listen to the OGs from back then who tell us, I always like to tell the story about the drug dealer from Harlem, AZ, who was depicted as Ace in the movie Paid in Full. When he was shot twice in the head and lived to survive to tell the tale, he says that there was so much money going around back then, there was no reason for anybody to rob or kill anybody. He said, I was a kingpin, I was a boss. And of course, he ran with the person that he described as a serial killer, which was, of course, Alpo Martinez. But he said that I never once ordered Alpo or anybody to kill anybody, because he said, I had so much money. If you wanted something from me, all you had to do was ask me and I would have given it to you. There was no reason for anybody to kill anybody. But the greed, you had to have the most, you had to be the best, you had to be the top dog. And even if there was room for both of us to eat, and that's not going to fly, one of us had to go. And so the violence came from the immorality. And so, as we say, the drugs have nothing to do with it, because something in the community was already broken.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier.
It just brought out more of what they were.
That's what I was saying earlier. You couldn't what crack bought was it was ridiculous. It was so much crime, so much violence, so many shooting, guns. I started seeing automatic weapons. You started seeing everything. You're like, what in the heck? But again, this person want to take over this block. They want to expand. It's all I'm saying is they wouldn't do all that stuff just to eat a meal.
Right.
All that wasn't going on just to wear clothes and have holes in it. It's just not. It wasn't the case. Everybody knew that was selling drugs back then had a goal in mind to get rich. Their goal was to have the nicest cars, the motorcycles, and all that. So again, this notion that they had to do is try to make it seem noble is insane. It's literally insanity. It's not true.
Right. Check out this guy.
The criminal justice system disenfranchises men and women, preventing them from growing, from truly being free. I am among the very few fortunate enough to be living a second chance. 3 decades ago, I was involved in a crime that took the life of another human being. I spent over 24 years in prison for my role in that reprehensible crime. Upon release, I found an employer willing to look beyond my criminal record. Meaningful re-entry increases productivity, reduces poverty, and saves money. Most importantly, it makes us safer by eliminating the circumstances that perpetuate cycles of crime and punishment. People already get punished harshly by the system, but they shouldn't receive a second sentence that makes discriminating against them legal for the rest of their lives. By restoring full rights of citizenship to people after they've been through the system, we can start to end this cycle of perpetual punishment.
Y'all get what they're doing, right? With this rhetoric, y'all understand what they're trying to do, right? Go ahead, Chuck.
I want to ask you, Chad, who employed this man? Who gave him a job? Why do they talk? Exactly. Why do they talk in such abstraction? No, don't dehumanize, free individuals. Talk to us directly. Look us in the eye and tell us exactly how you feel. You know how it'll sound, right? It's not going to go over well. Tell us what you demand of us, sir. Because in order for someone to be willing to employ you or anybody else for that matter, right, they have to make the conscious decision to do so. After all, they are paying for your services, right? Your labor comes with the price. It's called your salary. But before I hand it over to you, it first belongs to me. Why should I give it to you? Why? Because of all that lofty BS you talking in your little script there, your little drawing or whatever you want to call it, your little Sesame Street illustration. Talk to me directly. Why should I give you anything? Why are you deserving of anything that belongs to me? Prove to me that I should part ways with my property and give it on to you. Why? Because I'm trying to fix some social problem. You talking in these sort of abstractions as if the society or we in these kind of nebulous terms to substitute for actual people, because it's not like the government employs him. Who gave him this job? Because why are you calling? Are you actually calling upon the state to force me to give you something? To force you?
That's exactly what he's doing.
To give you a job?
That's exactly what he's doing, and that's what I was getting at. That's what I was getting at. Like the last bit of what he said there is, we should make, I forget exactly how he said it, but he said something to the effect of, we should make it illegal to discriminate against those who are ex-felons. So by me not hiring you, I'm discriminating against you, and therefore you should have the right to come and sue me and take money out of my pocket, work money that I worked hard for, because I'm not giving you, an ex-felon, a job.
Somewhere in the Civil Rights Act, Chad, I guarantee you they'll find a way to shoehorn it into some article in the Civil Rights Act. They'll find a way.
Oh, totally. That's totally where we're headed. Without a doubt, definitely.
Well, first of all, he says I was involved in a crime that took the life of someone. I'm like, man, you killed somebody.
Just say you killed somebody.
You killed somebody. I'm trying to dress it up like you a murderer. What you talking about? And then he gonna say, imagine somebody killing somebody, going to prison, and then getting out of prison expecting a job.
Right.
Like, in what world we living in? Then you murder somebody, did 24 years. What skills do you have? Were you in there being productive? Were you in there being somebody's girlfriend? Like, what were you doing in prison that warrants you to be to get a job and you got out of prison? This is insane. You crazy.
Hey, Blanchard.
And then you think that there should be laws on the books that allows you to sue somebody for not hiring you.
Right.
I mean, just
and Chad and Blanche, what's crazy to me is they wonder why there aren't the this abundance of economic opportunity that they think that there should be. But they keep calling on the government to wait to put their finger on the scale and get involved in the private sector, thus de-incentivizing job creation. It's just amazing to me. You continue to go to the government, then you look around and you wonder, say, why isn't anyone producing? I don't want to, man. It's too risky because of people like you. Oh my goodness, it's just crazy because it's all part of that whole voice, that whole spirit of that. It's just
then a little illustration for the niggly minds.
Yeah.
Draw black folks in. I'm gonna color these pictures. Black folks all engaged. Listen, sir, you're already black, right? So let's get you're already black, so I'm already skeptical. And you kill somebody, I'll probably not gonna hire you. I'm sorry. I don't, because to me, he doesn't sound rehabilitated. I still hear him blaming society. So again, I don't think you've changed as a person. So I think you actually got worse. Because you kill somebody, you're coming out expecting more. So no, sir, I'm not gonna hire you. I'm not gonna do it. Sorry.
Yeah.
But you heard the part when he said, lucky for me, I was able to get out and somebody hired me.
They look past his record. They look past it.
Right. So somebody in the private sector hired you without being coerced by the government to do so. That's the way it should be.
Right.
If you're able to prove that you are rehabilitated, if you are able to prove that you do have the skill that this particular employer in question is in search of, if they know your record and is yet and still willing to hire you, there's a lot of those out there, actually. It might not be the job you want. It might be doing something that you don't want to do, but so be it. That's most people who never committed a crime. Out there doing something that they don't want to do to feed their families. Not all of us, because the thing is, see, Disney got y'all all kind of twisted up in the head. Y'all think that you're supposed to just graduate, go out, get the job doing what you want to do, and become a millionaire overnight. That's what you think, but you got it twisted. Like, you got the game messed up. That's not how it goes in real life. A lot of us are doing things that we don't want to do. And so the fact is, we do what we need to do to provide for ourselves and for our families. Because the fact is, the job is not the point. The point is to see that your family is provided for. I would literally shovel horse manure if it meant providing for my kids and my wife. Like, I would literally, haul trash if it meant providing for my family. Why? Because that's what you do as a man. And if I made mistakes that landed me in prison, yes, that limits the kind of jobs I have access to, but that's the consequences of my own actions. It is stupid for me to then run to the government and say, government, make it illegal for people not to hire me because of my record. Like, that doesn't make for a better society. Like, what are we doing?
Chad, do you think if you were to ask him, do you think that guy supports a mandatory minimum wage? If you had to guess.
Oh yeah, he most definitely does.
You see? Exactly.
He most definitely does.
Right. So if one of the things, if you are a felon and you want to get reintegrated into society, then why don't you push for the abolition of the mandatory minimum wage? Why don't you push for a cut in just overall tax rates? Why don't you push for tax reform that would lower taxes across the board for all quote unquote classes of people? If you want a job, sir, you have to understand what it takes to actually spur economic growth, which creates, of course, incentives. And so, you may be pushed down the line, but guess what? When there's a job surplus, then that means potential opportunities open up for people like you. But you're probably, if I had to guess, I'm more in favor of these more so progressive economic policies that makes it even harder for people in the private sector to even consider hiring someone with your background. These people aren't even in pursuit of the right policy adjustments. If you want to talk politics, these people don't. It's weird, Chad. It's a strange how these people deal with these contradictions in their mind, and just to get up here and to have no sense of what's actually going on basic economics 101, but they can just talk in all this platitudinous rhetoric, these bumper sticker slogans. It's maddening. It really is. And probably thousands, if not millions, of people will watch that and shout and pump their fists and shouting amen.
Yeah, because we've been conditioned to think that the criminal is the victim. He's only in the system because the system is wrong. And so he was just a productive black man, doing great in the community. And then one day they decided to lock him up for 24 years.
He was on his way to church.
Bible
in his hand.
Feeding the homeless, singing the gospel song, and going to church. And then somehow the man came and picked him up, threw him in prison 24 years. What's funny? It was a guy at the barbershop one time, and he said, man, back in them days, it was racism. I was like, for real? What happened? He said, man, I was walking down the street, man, I just got these brand new shades, man. I was walking, and I remember I walked across the bridge, and the police pulled up, and they said, hey, man, you look like somebody that did a crime. He said, he snatched me, threw me in the car, took me down to the precinct. They had me in there. They had me in the cell. They was torturing me. I didn't get my phone call. He said they were whooping him with water hoses. They cut water hoses in, so they was whooping them and trying to get him to confess to a murder. And he said, but man, I wouldn't do it, man. I steal my guns, and then after about a week of beating on me, they finally let me go. Now, everybody in the barbershop believe what this man is saying. I know that the average black person get hit with that water hose one time, they'll get the holiday. whatever they being accused of, they're gonna go ahead and say it. I just told him in the chat, in that movie Glory, when Denzel is sitting there and he's about to get whipped because he got some shoe, when he go get some shoes, and that tear falling.
That tear.
I don't know what black folks y'all know. The average black man, that whip grazed by his back. He get to hollering and screaming, Lord, please, Jesus. So listen, black
Richard Pryor said all you got to do is give them some tight shoes, and they'll get the hooping and hollering.
Come on, bro. Was the war on drugs justified? Y'all, you know what's funny about black people?
Where did you see that question? Is that on IG or is that on here?
It's on here. Black people complain about how detrimental the crack era was. So if it's the one event that you all can point to that says that it set black people back, then how would you combat it without going to war with it? Please explain it to me. Explain to me how y'all wanted to solve this great crack epidemic. How would y'all solve it without a war? Tell me. Go in there and set up programs. They had those. Pass out pamphlets. They had those. I mean, there was so much effort put into curbing the crack. I mean, it wasn't even funny. It was so many programs created, so many people on the ground. It was a lot of work done to curtail the crack epidemic. But that wasn't enough, because you had drug dealers selling it and people making albums, glorifying it. So you had half of the culture glorifying it, half of the culture suffering from it. So again, yes, it should have been a war. Yeah, there still should be a war.
But well, here's the conspiratorial mind of the niglet, as you like to call it. Oh man, that Tales from the Hood. Anyway, yeah, man.
I got to watch that tonight after the live stream.
Little puppets, man. That's some ugly, scary looking things, man. But anyway,
those little dolls.
And who led the nigglets? Big Mama. Go back. Big Mama led the nigglets.
But well, yeah, man. The conspiratorial mind, of course, since the government planted the drugs there, they did so for the purpose of creating the necessary surplus to fill the prisons for the purpose of increasing or bolstering the profits of the privately owned prison industrial complex, aka I forgot the woman, this leftist, I figured her name. I always know what she looked like because she's so high yellow. She wrote the book The New Jim Crow. I don't know if you all familiar with the woman.
Yeah.
I've been seeing her for years, making the rounds. And
What
this,
was
I
her
mean,
name?
she shaped the whole mindset and the attitude of this whole notion of the prison industrial complex. But to your point, Blanche, you talk about how much of a success it was, how much of a success it wasn't. But the true, I think,
Michelle Alexander.
the lesson of the war on drugs is to show us what little government can do once the people decide that they no longer want to be civilized. When people just simply decide that they are hell-bent on doing something wrong or something that is not in their best interest, there are certain limits in terms of what government can do in order to fix a problem. I don't have no problem, whatsoever. You create laws, laws are created. You break the laws, you pay the price, right? It's just that simple. But people were talking about back then, there were all sorts of propaganda campaigns aimed at making crack cocaine seem like it was this big thing when it really wasn't. And then later on, they start talking about statistics involving other forms of substance abuse that were far more dangerous. Why were we treating crack like this when we weren't treating alcoholism like this, or even tobacco smoke, they say, is more addictive than crack cocaine? Again, I'm just telling you what a lot of these experts have said throughout the years. Whether crack is more addictive than cigarettes, whether cigarettes are more harmful, it's not nor here nor there. That's not my point. But my point is, Blanche, that if it was in fact the problem, and you got mad at the war on drugs, because you're going to call for the government to intervene once you become so desperate and your back gets pushed up against a wall. The warning in the tale, the moral of the story when it comes to the war on drugs is never allow yourself to lose your morality to the point where you back yourself up into a corner and you have nothing else left to do except to call on the government that is not suited to fix the problem, but they're going to try and try and to the point where next thing you know, you've simply given all of your rights away because you have begged the government to respond to a crisis that is one of your own making. So nevertheless, regardless of how you feel about the war on drugs, it's still your fault. Still your fault. You created this drug culture. You did that. Talk about the government, the CIA, going all the way back to all of, the strange scenes beyond the canyon and the whole era of the hippie movement and LSD and all that kind of stuff. You can say that it was a CIA operation all you want to, but at the end of the day, man, we have our own free will as our last defense. And that's all that matters, because nobody made you do anything that you didn't want to do.
Right. Right.
CIA didn't make them rap albums glorifying it.
No. But that's another one you hear. Blanche, you ain't heard that one? That the CIA really controls the music industry. It's just always something.
They don't make this, like, this is my thing, right? At what point do black folks have agency over what they do? Like, I mean,
never.
This is
never.
crazy. Like,
never.
Every time they do something, it's always somebody else's fault. Like, my goodness.
Never.
All right, let's play this clip and then we'll read our supers.
Discussing now is an issue where some of our friends are saying we're not getting tough enough on the criminals. We have the highest percentage of people in America in jail per capita of any industrialized nation on earth. What do we have to do? Put half the country behind bars?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, instead of talking about punishment and vengeance, let us have the courage to talk about the real issue. How do we get to the root causes of crime? How do we stop crime? I've got a problem with a president and a Congress which allows 5 million children to go hungry, 2 million people to sleep out on the streets, cities to become breeding grounds for drugs and violence. If you want to get tough on crime, let's deal with the causes of crime. Let's demand that every man, woman, and child in this country have a decent opportunity and a decent standard of living. Let's not keep putting poor people into jail and disproportionately punishing blacks.
Put the Put the blacks in jail first.
He said we got to stop disproportionately punishing the blacks.
That's a lie, man. I've never in my life seen anybody that I knew that went to prison or jail that wasn't guilty.
That was guilty, right? I wasn't guilty.
I don't know. No. They were all. I've never seen a person mistaken identity. No, they did it. They did it. Everybody I know did it. As a matter of fact, most criminals I know got away with more than they did. So they got away more times than they got caught. So again, no. Bernie, Social, and Sanders.
Man, full-fledged, unapologetic communist. All his life.
On crime, we gotta fix the issue. How you gonna fix it? How you gonna make somebody not be a degenerate? I don't want to, like, how y'all gonna make somebody want to be industrious? That's crazy. Make you not want to smoke crack. How? And cigarettes are more. People that got off crack, they could get off crack, but they could not stop smoking cigarettes. Them cigarettes, man. Listen, cigarettes. People could get off heroin and crack, but they couldn't put the cigarettes down at all.
Yeah, like I said, I've heard experts say that too. That's why I said the war on drugs was a overblown moral panic. But anyway, Bernie Sanders. I mean, what can be said about Bernie Sanders that we don't?
That clip, by the way, was from 1991, just for context.
Yeah, Mr. Anyway, I can run down a list of Bernie Sanders his whole life and all the things he's done.
He honeymooned in the Soviet Union, by the way.
Yeah, he honeymooned in the Soviet Union. Went over to Israel. I forgot the name of the group of Israelis there in the kibbutz where he stayed for a time. These were, doctrinaire Marxists in that particular area of Israel. He's always been this guy. He was the guy who, speaking of the crack era, the 1980s, he was a big apologist for Daniel Ortega, and just on and on and on. I'll be here all night talking about Bernie Sanders. I won't even give him the time of day. But it's just, and we know what's funny. There's another popular talking point you hear that, the United States, we have the largest prison population of any other industrial country in the world. What are we going to do? Lock up half the population? I'm sitting there shaking my head like, okay, yeah. Well, these people act like that there are human beings out in the world making choices and making decisions every day. There are things that are actually happening out there. It's like, well, this can't possibly be happening because look at the incarceration statistics, because that tells me something about human nature that I don't want to come face to face with. This tells me something about humanity that I don't want to deal with, right? Because the reality of it all is far too scary. The conspiracy is not what bothers people, because the conspiracy always gives them this unachievable thing that they feel as though they need to solve. Right. Let's find out who's actually, the members of the Boule, or who are the real members of the Illuminati, and put them in handcuffs and drag them away, or take them usher them away to the gallows to be hanged. That'll never happen, but it'll give you something that you can constantly go to the internet and talk about. The fact of the matter is that there's scary people right outside your door. You walk by them every day. So life in and of itself is a struggle. Life in and of itself is a scary proposition. And to live is to suffer. And people don't understand that. Bernie Sanders surely doesn't understand that. And so, yes, why not? Why not lock up half the population? It's ridiculous. And there are factors, as far as the United States is concerned, that makes us different from other industrial nations. One of the correlations, maybe not causation, but one of the correlations you see when it comes to crime is that countries that are ethnically homogenous tend to have lower crime rates. And so perhaps, again, I'm not saying that this is a cause, but there are a multitude of factors. When you have a multiple ethnicities coexisting, it leads to higher rates of crime. When you have a large and pretty dynamic economy, meaning there are multiple quote unquote economic classes, what tends to be an indicator of crime is relative, quote unquote, poverty. So meaning that you have a large, differing folk who are poor, you have more economic dynamism in a society. That tends to be a correlation between, that and, as I mentioned, poverty. So there are a multitude of different factors. Sometimes, if you look at it that way, the size of the prison population can in fact be indicative of a society's economic health. It may not say good things about its moral, it's the state of its society as far as its virtue, but most certainly that could be an indicator of a society that has very robust economic vitality, is a large prison population, because relative poverty can have a correlation. There's a correlation between relative poverty and crime. But again, you're talking to a politician. You're not talking to someone who thinks. You're simply talking about someone who is adept at knowing what he can get away with saying. What can I get away with?
Right on. You want to read the supers, Blanche?
Workmen approved. Poverty is not lack of money. Poverty is about character. There are people who have little but will not let the circumstance determine their behavior. Exactly. Thank you, Workmen approved. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Dead or alive. May your content be pleasing to our Lord, so he may magnify your videos, so you may reach many. Lots of love. Thank you, Dead or Alive.
Thank you.
Matt Blaylock. Capitalism without a fundamental practice of Christianity within the system is what opens the door to socialism, communism.
I agree with that.
Me too. I agree with that. Alex Tyson. Rich athletes and rappers commit crimes at a high rate with millions in their bank account.
Hey, low key, that's true though. When we look at the statistics, these professional athletes in the NBA, NFL, relative to the general population.
Crime is not based on how much money you have. People do crime at all levels. They even call white collar crime.
Mm-hmm.
Greg Witch, thanks for the super sticker. Chris Creative, bruh, I wish black women had never discovered the word trauma.
and toxic. Trauma and toxic. We need to put them two words to bed.
Both things, most of them are traumatic and toxic.
Except for the black women that watch this show. Y'all are the good ones.
Y'all all right, but they know. Greg Witch, the great historian Paul Johnson said the success of the Jews was considered violence towards the French people in the 17th century. The French kicked them out, of course.
That's true. That's true. They would blame the Jews for their wealth. They would kick them out, and then you would have authorities in other countries beckoning Jews to come to their country to help improve their economies. And then when the Jews would come, and then they would add, economic vitality to the society, they were once again scapegoated, and they were forced to leave again. And so this was commonplace in France and Russia and in other places in Europe and parts of Asia, most certainly.
Vintage Goods Willie, I was watching All in the Family with the new lens, a lot of the truth in the show. Yeah, you might watch a lot of those shows, you see what they were saying. Robert Lamoa, I also find ironic that people are complaining about gentrification increasing their property values, and thus property taxes will, while also supporting zoning laws to artificially raise the property value.
Yep. And that's another thing. The two things those black folks go to: the crack era and redlining. Those are two. Racism, systemic racism, don't exist. What about the crack era? And what about redlining? Don't have the foggiest idea how the housing market actually works.
Exactly.
None whatsoever.
Everybody's a self-appointed economist on the internet. Seems
exactly. So they saw that one TikTok reel that one time.
Yeah, exactly.
Alethea, excellent discussion tonight. Bless you all. Sadly, many blacks do not want to renew their minds and live in lives in Scripture, which is the first step to freedom. And many folks profit from keeping this going. Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
And black folks want to see it. They want to see it. Gigi Ryder, Chad, my new liberal POV is slavery didn't become morally wrong until new liberal enlightenment ideas spread, made it a stain in Christian goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
Wax gifted Chad with 5 memberships. Rick Hampstead, always a great show. God loves you all. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, Rick.
Idris Singleton, I don't understand how people, especially on the left, are for a $15 minimum wage and illegal immigration. Can't they see that it will undercut all wages?
Obviously
I don't
not.
think they think about that. I mean, I think again, like, and I was actually touched on this, I guess, loosely when it came to, or when I did a live stream yesterday with, it wasn't a live stream, actually, it was a podcast with Katie Truther, a show who Blanch has been on a number of times. But basically, when it comes to leftist campaigning, political campaigning and political stumping, the goal is not to get the electorate. The goal is not to get voters to understand their policies. It's not to get voters to understand the inner workings of their agenda, but rather it is to evoke emotion in the voter. It is to make them feel a certain way, because people remember feelings more than they do facts. Like, think back to your high school experience. You can better tell me what you felt when this or that happened than you can remember verbatim different things that were said, or different, if that makes sense. So basically, we as human beings, we believe we remember more feelings and smells and things of this nature than we do the intricacies of complex ideas. And so leftist politicians have that down pat, and this is why they don't really have to unfold or unpack the long-term effect of their ideas, of their rhetoric. All they have to do is say some buzzwords, say some slogans without necessarily explaining them or unpacking them, and people, they get behind it because people aren't thinking about the long-term effects of their ideas. You know what I'm saying? So this is the reason why, in my opinion, and maybe Chuck and Blanche, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the reason why I think the left are more successful when it comes to propaganda and campaigning, because they're focused more on feelings, whereas Republicans are more focused on facts and statistics and data. Yeah. People are going to remember facts and statistics and data, but they can remember how they felt. They can remember a smiling face of a politician who's telling them that, if you vote for me, I'm going to make all your wildest dreams come true. And so, and you see, like, I think Trump, better than any Republican politician in my lifetime, is able to do that. He's able to invoke feeling. The difference is there's likely facts behind what he's saying. But Trump is so good at invoking feeling that you have Kamala Harris, who's basically hijacking some of his talking points and making it part of her campaign. Yeah, some of y'all may have seen. I think our friend Oliver Mack, he posted a video today where he showed Trump in early June, saying that he wants to get rid of taxes on tips. And then Kamala Harris, she comes out 2 days ago and she's saying the exact same thing, as though the idea originated with her. Why? Because they realize that this is a very popular policy proposal, getting rid of taxes on tips. But that didn't originate with Kamala. It didn't necessarily originate with Trump either, but Trump beat Kamala to the punch in terms of popularizing that as a talking point. Mm-hmm. But my point is, folks, is that Republicans, they focus more on, well, did you know that it was really the Republicans who freed the slaves? Did you know that in 1892, all the data and statistics and facts? And don't get me wrong, you're right, but people don't remember that stuff. They want to feel a certain way. And this is why the politicians, the candidates, the demagogues who can promise you the world on a silver platter, even though they know themselves that they themselves can't fulfill that, those tend to be the most successful because they can evoke feeling.
Yeah. Stephen Carter, governing humans are like herding cats. Yet the Chinese government imposed incentives and constraints on 1.4 billion people. Who is governing demoralized Black folks?
Themselves.
Satan.
In their so-called leadership.
Devil.
And it's the devil.
Satan.
Their father, the devil.
Gigi Ryder, instead of blaming Jew bankers, reverse U.S. tax policy changes that falsely turn home into a real estate investment. It requires inflation for solvency.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think about that one.
Instead of blaming Jew bankers, reverse U.S. tax policy changes that falsely turned home into real estate investment. It requires inflation for solvency.
I mean, when he's I never mind. I can't inquire because that'll open up a whole can of worms. I don't want to be here too long because I want to kind of engage on that point. But I know we're about to close out. Well, that's something I want to think about.
Was that all of them?
Yeah, that's all of them. Yes.
Okay. Cool. So it looks like Quisha, due to the storm there in Jacksonville, is having technical difficulties, so she wasn't able to finish out the show with us. So I just wanted to pass it around one last time. I know it was kind of the show was kind of weird because you had Quisha bouncing in and out, and then you had Chuck that came in late. And I'm not trying to throw shade on anyone. I'm just saying it is what it is. So just to, I guess, end the show on a note that is pertinent to the topic or the matter at hand.
Yeah.
I did want to pass it around for some closing statements. We'll start with you, Blanche, of whether or not crime, or I'm sorry, whether or not poverty begets crime. What say you?
No, it doesn't. I think we've hammered that point home that crime is a character issue. If you're, and again, I believe that the criminal mindset is a person that believes in, cutting corners, a person that believes in, not giving 100%, a person that really doesn't adopt successful habits or godly attributes. So the criminal element starts probably when the person's a child and they start, not turning in your homework. I imagine would lead to you wanting to end up, doing crime you're trying to get over, basically. So no, poverty does not increase or promote crime. The little thing you created says socialism will reduce crime. Again, these people love to remove the human element, and you're not going to be able to get rid of human nature. Even if you try to force people to do things, they're still going to be human beings. So unless you plan on putting a computer chip in everybody's heads and putting programs in it, people are going to be people. And so crime will always be here. Do I think crime is really a problem? I'm going to say no, because the majority of society doesn't engage in crime. They just don't. I think what happens, though, is that crime gets a lot of attention. And I think crime is glorified. And so to me, that's the problem, where you seem like you see society almost encouraging criminal behavior because you see criminals as going against the system. But no, poverty just makes people make probably poor decisions. And to get out of poverty, it takes righteous attributes to get out of it. So.
Yeah, let me fix my camera a little bit. Yeah, to piggyback off Blanche, he's right. Majority of people do not commit crime. But the funny thing is, you never know how close you are to the breaking point until you're there. Folks my age and younger, they don't remember the 60s. They weren't alive. They don't recall the 70s. Crime, it has not been in the United States as bad as it was during the 1970s, particularly, say, for example, in a city like New York, where there were, well over 2,000, almost 3,000 murders in New York City annually. It was complete and utter bedlam. You had these anarcho-communists in the form of the Weathermen and the Symbionese Liberation Army and all these groups. You have the Revolutionary Communist Party of today, even still. But a lot of people don't recall that. They just weren't alive then. But unfortunately, like I said, you don't know you're there until it's too late. I don't want to say crime is not an issue. It can be an issue, and there are ways, and that's why I always tip my hat to the framers of our country, the way they set everything up, because your neighborhood doesn't necessarily have to look like the person's neighborhood just a few blocks down the street. You look at someone like me from Detroit. We have the long the strip of strip clubs called 8 Mile, that you all are familiar with because the movie made it famous. But 8 Mile is a street that divides Detroit from the suburbs. You have a whole string of suburbs running on the north side of 8 Mile, and then the city of Detroit is on the south side of the street. And all you have to do is go one street over, and it's like you stepped into a totally different environment. But I don't know how long that thin veneer is going to last. That the social fabric is very delicate, and the way in which things are going, all it takes like lightning hitting dry brush, and next thing you know, you have an inferno. Human beings, we aren't as civilized as we think we are. In the way that these Marxists are playing with our lives. And we know that it can happen because it has happened to so many other people. Just the other day, I was riding down the street. I seen a woman holding up a sign. I've never seen anything like this before. I was driving through Dearborn Heights. I see a woman holding up a sign, need food, hungry, whatever. And I'm looking at the way she's dressed, and I was like, something don't seem right about this woman. And I got close and I looked at her sign. And this woman, some way, somehow, had just recently escaped Venezuela. And she's standing on a corner not too far from my house begging with a sign, with a placard with a Venezuelan flag on it. How the heck she get here and where did she come from? Well, we know how she got here and where she came from. But I just said, oh, snap, here it come. That's just one. And see, those kinds of things, man, when all that, just even the aesthetic in your environment can demoralize you so much so where you just completely cast everything you knew to be righteous to the side. And then next thing you know, it's Mad Max in your backyard. It doesn't take long. And it's it can happen very, very, very quickly. And shortly, straight to the point, Chad, no, poverty does not create crime. This is a Marxist conception. All right, this idea that human beings derive their thoughts from their environment. This is Marx and Engels. This is what they taught. This is what they believed, and those others who thought as they did. And the answer is no. That's false. Like you said, people are poor because of their behavior. If you want to increase, if you want to help build the Black economy or whatever you want to call it, if you want to build economic wealth to have prosperity in Black neighborhoods, you need to get rid of the crime. Getting rid of the crime is not going to bring putting economic prosperity by way of wealth transfers is not going to, right? It's not going to alleviate crime in Black areas. It's going to make it worse because, in fact, the people to whom you plan on taxing, they're just going to find ways to avoid you. And then they'll simply accuse those people, of course, of being racist, these little recalcitrants who don't want to give up their things. And so they'll just avoid the jurisdiction of the taxing authority. And next thing you know, the politician that made all these promises, they're sitting there holding the bag. And then when the people don't get what they feel as though they were promised by way of the politician that they elected, they become more and more embittered, and the problem just gets worse and worse.
Right. We have a let's see here. The super from Stephen Carter says, when do black businesses, what am I saying? When do black businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals take extreme ownership for the hearts and minds of the lower order of blacks, like other successful ethnicities? I don't know. Let's see. When do black businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals take extreme ownership for their hearts and minds of the lower? I don't know. It's a responsibility. Unless I'm misunderstanding the question, maybe Chuck and Bunch, you can help me out. But when do black businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals take extreme ownership for the hearts and minds of lower order of black folks? I mean, I think it's I think it's the responsibility of what you call the lower order of black folks to take responsibility for their own hearts and lives, quite frankly. And I would go a step further, unless I'm misunderstanding you, and say that they need to basically die to themselves and give their lives to Christ. That's what they need to do. And that goes not only for the lowest order of black folks, but that goes for the so-called businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals as well, because they're not in any better of a position, spiritually speaking. The fact is, there's a lot of black folks, and I made the comments, and of course, keeping it within context, the point that I was making whenever I went live with Chuck, when I touted the numbers of, most blacks are not impoverished, most blacks are, only a minority of black men are in prison, this, that, and the third. The point that I was making is what these blacks call the struggle, or how they conveniently identify with the struggle for voting purposes, is all fraud. It's all cap. These are people who are imposters, and I use the term, they're engaging in a kind of identity theft. They are identifying with the so-called grievances of their lowest common denominator, because they believe that in so doing they'll get some kind of political power or political clout by playing the victim. So that's why I said that. But what I'm not saying is that the folks who are the majority of black folks who are in the middle class, the majority of the black folks who are not impoverished, what I'm not saying is that they are somehow spiritually superior to those who are poor. And that goes not only for blacks, but that goes for any ethnicity. Just because somebody has more money in their wallet, in my opinion, doesn't mean that they're more spiritually in order than as someone who is important. I know people who live paycheck to paycheck, who are just some of the dopest, down to earth people you'll ever meet. And I know some people who are very wealthy who are just not so good people. Let me just put it that way. But the reality of it is, the point that I'm making is, it's easy to compartmentalize people into different, I guess, categories based upon their income, and make a judgment as to, which category is spiritually better than the other. When the reality is, it's more complex than that, because at the center of it all, you're dealing with human beings. And when it comes to black culture, and this kind of goes, along with the whole nuance and complexity of it all. When it comes to black culture, the fact is, it's hard to speak. It's hard to generalize or to speak on this subject matter, because what you have kind of built into the conversation or built into the discussion is this notion that all blacks are suffering at the hand of a systemically racist white capitalist society. So that's what you're having to contend with first and foremost. So then you combat that by saying, well, no, only a very small minority of black folks are impoverished. Okay, well, that means that those who aren't impoverished are spiritually doing better than those who aren't. Well, no, it's actually more complex than that. So, the fact is, I don't know. Let me not go continually down this rabbit hole, because there's a lot that I want to say, as you can see, but it's I'm trying to find a way to say it as distinct and as short and as quickly as possible. And there's just no way I can do that without monologuing for the next 15 minutes. And I want to spare y'all, and I want to spare, I want to be mindful of Chuck and Blanchard here and their time. But I don't know. Do any of you have any response to this, what he's trying to say here? And I'm not coming for you, Stefan. I'm just saying that like I personally don't think it's a responsibility of what you say the businessmen, unless you're just being sarcastic, the businessmen, the bankers, and the intellectuals to
maybe he's saying
that's what I'd say. I took it as maybe perhaps sarcasm to say that ethnicities that are successful don't actually have to rely upon businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals. Could be a bit of sarcasm. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay, I see what they're saying. I'm stupid. When do black businessmen, gangsters, and intellectuals take extreme ownership for their hearts and minds? Are you saying that why don't they mind their own business and take ownership of their own hearts and minds instead of trying to worry about the lower order of blacks? Is that what you're saying? You can, if you've clarified what you're saying in the comment section without a super, I can read it. But yeah, if what you're saying is how I'm reading it, or how I read it the first time, then no, I don't think it's the responsibility of the upper classes to take the lower classes under their wing. I mean, yes, if you want to do that on an individual basis, if you want to mentor or whatever, that's your prerogative. But the fact is, we've seen all of these kind of like, black folks, we just need to come together. And like, that's what they try to do with the Talented 10th. And it's always failed. Like, people just need to mind their own business and and clean their own noses and remove the log from their own eyes is basically what I say.
Just like your boy Lil Durrell, aka Ricky Smiley, just went viral recently talking about black folks can't agree on we can't agree on nothing. We can't agree on this. Everybody want chicken. There's always one person that want hot dogs. Talking about Kamala Harris. Talking about why can't we all agree? It's just the presumptiveness is just out of control. Why do you assume that black is like, seriously, they actually believe, and I can hear the sincerity in his voice, that we're all supposed to, when it comes to voting, y'all, we all supposed to get on board. We all supposed to think alike and believe as one. That's it. It's a shame black folks can't agree on nothing, man. Y'all out here shaming Kamala. And 9 times out of 10, when it comes to everything else, black folks seem to fall in line. But now it seems like there's some chinks in the armor there. And here come the slave wranglers. Here come the black celebrity class, right in line.
Luke.
It's crazy. Right.
I think to your point, Stephen Carter, that like when it comes to other ethnicities and the fact that those who find themselves either for fault of their own or for fault of their parents or grandparents who cause them to be in the situation that they're in terms of their income, I think that it's not this thing that people think that a lot of black folks think that, oh yeah, see what's happening is the white entrepreneur and the Jewish entrepreneur, they're taking the poor Jew or the poor white person under their wing, and like, no, that's not what's happening. The fact is, it's kind of an inadvertent kind of leadership. It's this idea of the people in my community who are successful are the bankers and the lawyers and the teachers and the this and the that. I want to aspire to be that. It's just kind of watching it in action and telling myself that I want to be like that guy. I want to be in his situation. Whereas black folks think like, no, they have these secret white meetings every Tuesday or these secret, Jewish meetings every Monday. And they try to come up with and develop a plan of how they're going to take over the world. That's what a lot of black folks think, unfortunately, but that's not what's happening. Like people just see what they like and they go for it. Yeah. And the fact is, so it's not so much that the intellectuals and the businessmen and these other ethnicities and these other groups are taking their lower caste under their arms. Like, no, that's not a thing that's happening. And again, I think you're probably being sarcastic. Or maybe it's just I don't understand what it is you're saying. But thank you for the super. And if you clarified, I didn't see it in the comment section, so I do apologize for that. And I know it's kind of getting late.
He said that his last comment said that our smart people have no power. But the thing is that if you are in fact smart, and I do get that there is somewhat of ethnic bias perhaps inherent within all groups, but your intelligence is your intelligence. That's your human capital. Now, of course, it is to the extent that you feel the need for whatever reason to associate with me on whatever ground so that I may learn what it is that well then okay, now you're talking about something, but that's on a one-on-one basis. But I think it goes back to what you said, Chad, that there need not be this class of Black folks who are in fact the quote unquote smart ones that have some sort of responsibility or dominion over the whole of Blacks in this country. Your intelligence is your intelligence. It belongs to you. And you do with it what you will and associate with whomever you please. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be the mass of Black folks. I mean, that's what freedom is all about. And I think that whether consciously or unconsciously, I think that most other ethnicities in this country and every other country for that matter probably move in this way, at least the successful ones. I don't know, Black folks are the only ones who think this way. And man, we need to stop praising our celebrities and start giving credit. And they'll say, well, we need not praise our celebrities, but we need to sort of praise our, I don't know, maybe our intellectuals, or they'll come on our platforms and ask us, how do we propose to solve the problem? It's like, and people largely are here because they respect us and like listening to what we have to say, but I'm not going to solve your problems. So anyway, but I gotta go, y'all, because my camera's getting ready to die. I'm looking at the comment section wondering what the heck y'all talking about Stacey Dash. What's going on, y'all? What we saying about Stacey?
They're saying she's been quiet during this. She's been very quiet and all this stuff is going on.
Oh, okay. Stacey, didn't she come out? Did she like apologize, saying that all her pro-conservative Trump stuff she was kind of suffering from some? I don't know. I heard that she kind of came out and she started backpedaling a couple of years ago. Yeah, I guess they must have got to her. But all right, y'all, let me get up out of here because I don't want my camera to down me abruptly.
All right, somebody said, I think I hate Marxists more than I hate mosquitoes. 02122.
Oh, yeah, that's a lot of hate. That's a lot of hate.
I don't hate anybody. I love. It's all love. It's all love. It's all love. All right. Well, we're going to end it with a montage. Love y'all. See y'all next Sunday. You can catch Blanche throughout the week. I think Mondays and Wednesdays, right?
Yeah, Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday.
Monday, Wednesdays, and Saturdays. And you can catch me on Tuesdays and Thursdays. See y'all next time. Love y'all.
Woman named one of America's most powerful women by Newsweek magazine as San Francisco's first female Indian American district attorney, Kamala Harris. She's out with a new book called Smart on Crime, a career prosecutor's plan to make us safer.
I'm a career prosecutor. I really believe that California has the ability, as that old adage says, so goes California, goes the rest of the country, to do what I think is really necessary in terms of reform of our criminal justice system so that we're reducing crime in our communities and increasing public resources.
Every time we get the expansion of citizenship and rights to African Americans, there is an immediate mobilization of new criminal laws and a small incarceration, at least initially, right? We see this happening after slavery, the black codes that basically make it a crime to not be employed by a white person, the simultaneous rise of a new system of penal labor. So this was the first kind of mini mass incarceration. So the federal government, by the time Ronald Reagan took office, something kind of strange begins to happen during this period with crime control strategies, and that's that police are no longer being charged with responding to crime that actually happens. But police are now being charged to respond to crime preemptively or proactively, responding to crime where it is thought to occur. So these flawed logics and investments have really structured many of our domestic social policies in the decade after the civil rights movement, and in doing so have undone many of the gains of the civil rights movement. Instead of continuing the war on poverty's investments in schools and in jobs and in better housing for people, the investments into policing and surveillance and incarceration end up surpassing those goals.
Both of my parents are repeat ex-offenders, and almost half of my brothers have spent time in incarceration. The system is broken at every single angle. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to oppress and criminalize Black and brown folks.
My family grew up in Harlem. My family is from Harlem. So I've had my brothers be swallowed by the mass criminal industrial complex. People were forced to do things that were not of their best interest, specifically sell drugs, right? So I've had brothers have to do things and I've had the conversation with them that they wish they didn't have to do. But at that time, they were literally forced. They couldn't go to school because they didn't have clean clothes. They were hungry at nights, going to sleep, eating dreams, literally eating dreams. And then have to go to school the next day and try to learn something. It's almost an impossible task, right? So then they become, all right, what's around me? What can I do to make money? Because I realized something. Being poor in America is one of the hardest things to do in this country. And if you feel like you're poor, you feel like you have nothing, you will do anything to get that. Poverty produces crime. That's just a simple fact.
What we're discussing now is an issue where some of our friends are saying we're not getting tough enough on the criminals. We have the highest percentage of people in America in jail per capita of any industrialized nation on earth. What do we have to do? Put half the country behind bars? Mr. Speaker, instead of talking about punishment and vengeance, let us have the courage to talk about the real issue. How do we get to the root causes of crime? How do we stop crime? I've got a problem with a president and a Congress which allows 5 million children to go hungry, 2 million people to sleep out on the streets, cities to become breeding grounds for drugs and violence. If you want to get tough on crime, let's deal with the causes of crime. Let's demand that every man, woman, and child in this country have a decent opportunity and a decent standard of living. Let's not keep putting poor people into jail and disproportionately punishing blacks.
First day of work was January 17, 2023.
Robert Turner Jr. is the newest district attorney for the 4th Judicial Circuit, and he's inherited counties with unflattering titles, highest poverty rates in the state, highest violent crime rates per capita, higher than several other larger surrounding counties, including Montgomery. Do you think the poverty rate plays a part in crime?
I think that the poverty rate does play a large role in the amount of crime that we're seeing. There's not a lot of revenue coming in from existing businesses. Then those cities and those counties don't have enough money to outfit police departments that can handle the surges that we're seeing in crime. The state and the nation needs to take a look at what happens, because until we eliminate poverty, until we eliminate lack, crime will remain a question.
When it comes to what is actually occupying a whole lot more space in our criminal justice system and therefore costing us a lot more, it's nonviolent crime. And I think we need to address that and deal with it in a way that ends the cycles. If we're going to really get tough on crime, we also have to address the underlying causes of crime and get tough on those.
Youngstown was once a great American city. 50 years ago, there were 25 miles of steel mills up and down the Mahoning River. Men left high school, found work in the factories, and moved their families into the middle class. It took 150 years to make Youngstown rich, but less than a generation for it to fall. Today, Youngstown is the poorest city in America. It's lost 40,000 manufacturing jobs and more than half of its total population. The reality is that cities like Youngstown failed to make the transition from the modern to the postmodern world. Over the past 30 years, there's been a dramatic rise in depression, addiction, violence, and suicide. We've demolished the old social order, but found nothing to replace it.
The criminal justice system disenfranchises men and women, preventing them from growing, from truly being free. I am among the very few fortunate enough to be living a second chance. 3 decades ago, I was involved in a crime that took the life of another human being. I spent over 24 years in prison for my role in that reprehensible crime. Upon release, I found an employer willing to look beyond my criminal record. Meaningful re-entry increases productivity, reduces poverty, and saves money. Most importantly, it makes us safer by eliminating the circumstances that perpetuate cycles of crime and punishment. People already get punished harshly by the system, but they shouldn't receive a second sentence that makes discriminating against them legal for the rest of their lives. By restoring full rights of citizenship to people after they've been through the system, we can start to end this cycle of perpetual punishment.
One person's poverty is another person's paycheck. And that's the American way. That's as American as apple pie. We shouldn't have to acknowledge that trauma because like they're paid to be there. We live in these places. Like police officers have historically not been held accountable because they protect and serve the rich, and then they just harass and take up space in poor communities.
Right.
How do we start to build towards changing that culture, and what does that conversation look like on a national scale?
What creates safe communities is recognizing that undiagnosed and untreated trauma among children who are growing up in high violence communities or in poverty, because by the way, poverty is trauma inducing.
Yeah, it is. Poverty is violence, right?
I think part of the issue is that in some people's mind, the only way you achieve safe communities is to have a law enforcement presence.
For white communities.
It's crazy.
Right, but the point being that we have to reorder how people understand safe happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Safe happens by having, resources in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Safe happens by addressing undiagnosed and untreated trauma. Safe happens by having, literally economic opportunities. Among what we should think about as civil rights is the right to everybody to live in a safe community.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how do we achieve that? And if we think about it that way, then we understand, well, that's not going to be about reacting to crime after it happens. That's going to be about preventing it before it does. And then you don't have to be really creative to figure out what prevention looks like. It looks like putting those kinds of resources into a community.